Beyond Binaries, Understanding Sexual Identities and Queer Rights Issues in India, Day 3. Namaste and greetings. I, Samriddhi, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #webpolicylearning. Today, we are gathered here for day 3 of Beyond Binaries, Understanding Sexual Identities and Queer Rights Issues in India, an online international summer school program, a 5-day immersive online certificate training course. This program is organized by the IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center, GISC. This program has an excellent panel who will be sharing their experience for this 5-day immersive online certificate training course. Our chair for the program is Professor Vibhuti Patel, visiting distinguished professor, IMPRI. The distinguished expert panel includes Maya Avasthi ji, Dr. Kaustav Padmapati ji, Sonal Gyani ji, Rituparna Nyog ji, Dr. Aksa Sheikh ji, Aro Akun ji, Vikramaditya Sahai ji, Professor Mala Ramanathan ji, Professor Pushpesh Kumar ji, Mr. Adhiraj Parasarthi ji, Professor Veena Vaswami ji, Vijayanti Vasanta Mogli ji, Dr. Preeti Barman ji, Harish Iyer ji, Rituparna Bora ji, Dr. Debolina De ji, Dr. Debashish Maitra ji, Dr. Lavanya Arvind ji. The convener for this course is Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director at IMPRI. A warm welcome to the course Beyond Binaries, Understanding Sexual Identities and Queer Rights Issues in India. Your active involvement in this program highlights the critical importance of engaging in open and meaningful discussions surrounding sexual identities and queer rights. By exploring these topics together, we can deepen our understanding, challenge societal norms, and work towards fostering an inclusive and equitable society for all. Thank you for joining us on this transformative journey. We have also shared the study materials and course outline via email on the topic related to Beyond Binaries for better perusal and understanding. Before we start today's session, I would like to announce the housekeeping rules. It is imperative that you join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions in the Q&A box and not on the chat box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Also, ensure that your questions are precise and refrain from making general comments in the question to save time. Our theme for day 3 is social and health dimensions. Our session for day 3 will cover topics ranging from attempting to measure sex, gender, and sexual identities in varying contexts, including research by Professor Mala Ramanathan ji, queer Marxism by Professor Pushpesh Kumar ji, issues in queer mental health care in an Indian context, aging, substance abuse, and access by Dr. Adhiraj Parasarthi ji, transformation required from Homo economicus to Homo ethicus by Professor Veena Vaswami ji. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor and privilege to invite the chair for the program, Professor Vibhuti Patel, to start the program with her opening remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Heartfelt thanks to Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, Viti Taza, Vaijanta Mogli, Naina Agarwal, Avash, and Samriddhi for their hard work to put together this course on a public demand during the Pride Month. I welcome today's resource persons, Professor Mala Ramanathan, Professor Pushpesh Kumar, Mr. Adhiraj Parthasarthi, and Professor Veena Vaswani. Let us have a recap of what transpired in the previous 2 days. First, day 1 was basically going into the conceptual clarity, historical legacy, socio-cultural, political, and geographic dimensions of the queer existential reality. Yesterday's session went ahead and we had many more aspects of Beyond Binary, where Mr. Rituparna Bora ji started with an illuminating narrative of building queer movement in rural and small town spaces in Assam. The visionary organizer par excellence shared his personal journey of education, reaching out, finding humane and creative solutions to multifaceted problems encountered by the queer community in Dibrugarh, Tejpur, Guwahati, and rural areas of Assam. It was an awe-inspiring narrative. Profile of processes involved in organizing pride rallies and gender diversity in educational institutions were really energizing. Rituparna ji found support of feminists very important in queer movement in Assam and stated that working with community is important even when some people may have different opinions. Cancel culture doesn't help the queer movement. In Rituparnaji's story, there were many parallels with the feminist movements of India during the 80s. Dr. Aksa Sheikh demystified health, well-being, and existential concerns of transgender persons and highlighted the need for queer responsive medical services. Statistical profile of queer community in terms of education, physical and mental health needs, suicide were eye-opening. Abusive families, insensitive doctors, exclusionary state policies, societal neglect result in self-discrimination, self-stigma, and social isolation. Dr. Akshaji's personal experience as a medical practitioner of witnessing painful gynecological problems, bodily injuries, consequences of botched operation of gender affirmative surgeries, hormonal treatment, breast implant and uterus implant, HIV, AIDS in the context of stigma and secrecy were heartbreaking. Aksaji recommended that there is an urgent need to include queer communities' health concerns in curricula of nursing, medical, psychology, and paraprofessional health education based on a ground level researches, which her organization also conducted participatory action research. Aro Ankuji shared Dalit queer practice in the context of complex, compounded, and cutting across spaces and time, inequality, and discriminatory treatment faced by Dalits in general and Dalit queer in particular. ROG's quoted theoretical insights of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Yashika Datta, Dhruva Jyoti, Akil Khan, Dhiren, Shailaja, and several auto-ethnographic writings and oral histories to portray lived reality of homelessness, hunger, statelessness, joblessness faced by Dalit queer persons. ROGs had started Dalit archives that showed that in all socio-cultural political processes, trans people were there, but they were invisibilized and were not given representation and voice. The erudite orator told the story of Swabhiman Yatra of queer movement in Hyderabad, showed the importance of cultural analysis and psychoanalysis as an important intellectual tools to understand social identities, differential entitlements, and supported the contribution of affirmative actions by the state, such as reservation policy, protective measures, such as Scheduled Caste and SC/ST Anti-Atrocities Act, and budgetary allocations under Scheduled Caste Plan and Tribal Sub-Plan. The soul-stirring presentation of Vikramaditya Ji Sahai brought in important dimensions of colonial legacy of Victorian stigmatization and brutalization of transgender persons who were classified as eunuchs, hijras, or habitual criminals. Sahai Ji averred that the same attitude of deeply criminalizing queer communities continue till the contemporary period. Such prejudicial attitudes are overtly embedded in the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019 and covertly embedded in the Nalsa judgment in the Supreme Court of India. All four speakers were on the same wavelength of sensitivity and intellectual legacy, and they were well-informed. The well-informed participants also asked them serious questions, and the speakers answered them with their answers were supported by case studies, evidences, data, and relevant references. Today, we are really pleased to have Professor Mala Ramanathan, Professor Pushpesh Kumar, Dr. Adiraj Patsarthi, and Dr. Veena Vaisvaswani to enlighten us about the relatively less explored areas of intellectual inquiry in queer studies. Over to IMPRI team. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we start our sessions. I would like to request Professor Mala Ramanathan Ji to take the session forward. Professor Mala Ramanathan Ji is a professor, Achyuta Menon Center for Health Sciences Studies, SCTIMST, Thiruvananthapuram, a working editor, and in the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, IJME. Ramanathan Ji will be talking about attempting to measure sex, gender, and sexual identities in varying contexts, including research. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I can see that, the the understandings, the rich understanding that is needed to ground what I'm talking about, because I'm not an expert in this area, but I am an expert of counting. And at least on paper, I'm an expert of counting and I do count. And what I'm going to talk about is, gradually in our country, various communities which need to be visibilized, for want of a better word, are gradually gaining public visibility, and that is an extremely important starting point. The richness of what Vibhuti Madam has just highlighted that has happened over the 2 days is very, very helpful for me, because we've now problematized the issues, the terrible problems that Aksa Sheikh has alluded to are very, very important to set the stage for what I am saying. And what I'm going to be talking about is, a very small talk, but it has implications because I am listening to, what shall we say, administrators, public policy developing people, and I realize we make an effort, experiential narratives visibilize a problem. But for people to, at the back end of a policy, I'm beginning to very gradually realize is this financing institutions of governments and other places who are in their orientation about where can they get the best return for the money. So problematizing an issue also requires telling people how many and for what. It's exciting to see that gradually even the government of India is embracing a rights perspective in a limited way. It's very, very nice to see, it's heartening to see that. But rights don't seem to gel very well with auditors and accountants. And with due respect, I think the bottom line in our country for investment for any collective initiative is that people, the policymakers, our legislators put money where, their mouth is, for want of a better expression, crude though it is. And for that, numbers matter. The world would be a nicer place if they didn't matter, and there was universal need for recognition of everybody's rights to health. But even today, I have to say that health is not a universal right. And different minority groups, particularly sexual minority groups, who have been stigmatized by law, by culture, by, shall I say, administrative neglect as well, are people who need to not only be rendered visible, but need to be counted. And oftentimes this became very clear to me when I was doing analysis of the vaccinations for COVID, that suddenly I find very nice transgender communities. But I don't see, for India, I have projections to tell me what proportion of the projected Indian population, men or women, got vaccinated. I had no estimates of denominator to see what proportion of the community, the sexual minorities, were left out. There was a label transgender, and the numbers were never increasing at any pace that the other numbers were increasing. And I was monitoring it for computational reasons on a almost weekly basis, and it tells me how far we have to go if we have to make what Aksha so, eloquently requested, that there be healthcare provisioning, training. It's a long way to go, but the beginning is counting. And that's exactly what I propose to talk about. I'm sorry that I'm going to be a wee bit boring by repeating definitional aspects, but the crux is how to count. These are not, I wish we had Indian, mechanisms and methods which are in keeping with our culture, but all I have is the National Institutes of Science recommendations, which we will need to adapt, but I thought that's a beginning on how to count. And we can, of course, subject it to our critical gaze. And I would like comments so that, this can move forward. As usual, the opinions expressed in this presentation are my own and do not represent those of the institutions to which I'm affiliated. And I'm particularly grateful to Dr. Vibhuti Patel for useful discussions, and particularly the material that she lent me to address this issue, because it is something new for me. What am I going to try? I'm going to identify why do we need to measure or count the sex, gender, and sexual identity, and what are the risks to individuals in attempting to count them. And this is extremely important because, going and counting people seems like a relatively harmless exercise, but not quite so within the Indian framework, where the stigma, they're subject to arbitrary, infringements of rights, and a host of other things. And I'm going to try to describe some means of measuring these conceptualizations, which emerge from a completely different culture. But however, in the absence of anything else, these are suggestions for future work. Why do we need to count the community? Civilian administrative processes tend to count everything. If they are not counted, they don't exist in our administrative records. So if public policy has to be targeted, we have to tell somebody there is 3,000 people left, or 4,000, or 60,000, or 60 lakhs, whatever that be, left out our policy making processes. That makes a point. Invisibilizing them hides them well from public policy. And that is the most important reason why we need to start counting. Because not being counted could result in having their health rights and a host of other rights not being upheld. Even with all the goodwill, and we know how much of that goodwill is lacking, and all my previous, panelists would have addressed those issues during the past 2 days. Counting different peoples in different groups will result in also beginning to recognize the challenges they face, and how far we have to move in including inclusive public policy. It's not enough to say inclusive or universal healthcare, because the people who have to deliver that healthcare don't know how to do it, as Aksa and others have pointed out. So we need to count. We need a universal way of counting in a non-discriminatory and autonomy affirmative way, and therefore we need standardized means of counting. And that is the reason why I am here to suggest something. I'm not by any means saying this is the best in an Indian context, or Kerala context, or Karnataka context, or Jammu and Kashmir context, or Northeast context. No, that's not it. But we need to start a discourse somewhere which is simple, easy, and universal. And that's what I am attempting. Because if we come up with complex issues, the survey researchers would leave it behind and say, we can't, it is too difficult, we leave it out and we'll be back. And Rome wasn't built in a day. So starting with small things, small drops may be a way to start. So sex in this context refers to sex traits, which include external genitalia, secondary sexual characteristics, gonads, chromosomes, and hormones. It's usually in our context just with no thinking assigned as male or female on the basis of visual inspection. Sex traits are assumed to be unambiguous, but are not necessarily so, and may not necessarily match that assigned at birth, and can also change or be altered over time through various interventions. In this categorizations, those who get left out are those who belong to intersex, whose sex traits do not correspond to a single sex. So even when you start counting just by visual inspection, there are people who get left out. Yeah? You just look at our starting. Then comes gender. Gender is a more complex, multidimensional construct that has links to gender identity, gender expression, and social and cultural expectations about status, characteristics, and behavior that are associated with sex traits in a particular cultural context. So it encompasses identity, expression, social and cultural expectations, and is usually again characterized as a binary, male, female, or man, woman. But gender identity, expression, and socio-cultural expectations may not all correspond to this binary characterization and could be actually fluid. And this characterization, which you see in most surveys, which conflate gender and sex, is itself a point of discontent for many of us researchers, and we haven't even bridged that to ask for the intersection between gender and sex to be identified. But I think we need to make that push in our usual surveys, because they can be wrong. We would have people who have no idea, minimal training, going and asking questions where we have 50 to 60% missing values, but that would be a start. They may be insensitive. We may do training for sensitization. There would still be errors, but we have to start somewhere. And that's what my plea is about. Gender identities, as I mentioned, could be transgender, person whose current gender identity is different from the sex they were assigned at birth. It could be transgender experience. All persons who can be classified as transgender regardless of whether they identify as such. It also is called transgender history. Cisgender is a person whose current gender identity corresponds to the sex they were assigned at birth. Non-binary is an umbrella term for gender identities that lie outside the gender binary that we usually tend to use. Gender queer is a person who does not follow gender norms. Gender fluid is a person who does not identify with a fixed gender. And two-spirited is an American term, but we have hajar terms. So I'm retaining that term till we identify different cultural contexts. See, I don't even want to go there by using an alternative term which may offend some subgroup. So we do have in each of our communities terms which we use, but they've become pejorative words. So I don't know what is an acceptable word to recognize in different cultural contexts, which are self-identities. Respectful self-identities which value the autonomy of the groups. So I am retaining this for want of a better requirement. Sexual orientation is again very important to count, and multidimensional construct that looks at emotional, romantic, sexual attraction, identity, and behavior. And it includes identity, a core internal sense of sexuality. Attraction includes the gender to which the person is attracted to, the strength of the attraction, including whether or not, so not feeling any attraction is also part of this, whether or not a person feels an attraction. behavior, a multidimensional concept that includes gender of the sexual partner and the specific sexual activities and their frequency, and characteristics describes in terms of the gender of the person desired or actual partners relative to their own gender and identity, attraction and behavior, which corresponds to the same sexual orientation. Sexual orientation identities could be heterosexual, straight, homosexual, gay, homosexual, lesbian, bisexual, queer, pansexual, where sexually oriented towards people of any gender, questioning uncertainty about sexual orientation identity, same gender loving, because this is a non-heterosexual orientation identity used by some within African American communities. Now, do we even have a list of how subgroups identify, or in Karnataka, what is the preferred word, and in subgroups among Koti communities, what they want to be called or how they prefer to be respectfully addressed? We don't. We need to start doing all that and documenting it and mainstreaming those things. You know, I wish that we talked about all this not only during Pride Month, but, you know, every event which organizers should look at the problems, health, economic, employment, everywhere. And that is something, a direction, you know, I feel very bad about it. I'm sorry, I keep harping on it. We need to talk and talk and talk and push and push and push. So only then we have to start to find out what they want to be called in a respectful way. Two-spirited is another word which I don't know how to replace. So I've retained it. So what are the principles? Now, I have made my plea, I hope, for why we need to count. But you know, you can't just run all over the place and start counting people in any which way. There has to be a rationale for it. It has to be inclusive. And that is the principle that should be, that they deserve to be counted. And we need to go around counting people. We need to be precise in that so that it reflects the constructs of the interested group. That's why I keep saying we need to find out what they want to be, what are the different things they want to be called as, and how do we identify them. Autonomy, meaning respecting their identity. That is why this plea is so important, and their autonomy. And we need to also be parsimonious, because if we have too many identifiers there, someone along the line is going to come and violate their right to privacy. So exactly what is needed is collected and nothing more. And respect for privacy is paramount, because, you know, every day we talk about, we give our data, we say Aadhaar has been leaked, that has been leaked, somebody has been collecting things. So this, in a country which, you know, we have barely given them legal existence. We've barely done that. So there is a host of challenges to overcome, and there may be a world when, you know, everybody will be equal. But until such time, the threats to them and their ways of living and, you know, livelihood is such a challenge. So their right to privacy is all the more sacred and needs to be respected. Therefore, we need to make pleas of, you know, confidentiality documents for research with ICMR or whatever is the regulatory agency for research, that this data can never be called for, identifiers can never be de-identified, things like that we need to put in place. So the context, you see, there are three specific contexts, and the risks across these contexts vary. And that is why, you know, it's very difficult to come up with an inclusive way of counting across three different contexts. Surveys, there is confidentiality, and when they report, it is aggregated, so individuals cannot be identified. So there is less risk for loss of confidentiality. In clinical settings, you know, the relationship between doctor-patient covers the confidentiality requirements, but often such data is collected also in administrative settings for employment and other places. And who is going around training our administrators in the requirements for confidentiality? I am crying myself hoarse even for ethics committees to recognize the right to privacy, leave alone administrators. So that's not subject to any, and the data has to be collected respectfully and confidentially and used appropriately, but the risks are high. Therefore, we need regulations to govern its collection and use. And here is where parsimony becomes extremely important. So questions that we can start to use is respectful, autonomous. Which one of the following? The list can vary, but which one of the following best represents how you think of yourself? Lesbian or gay, straight, that is not gay, or lesbian, bisexual. If it's indigenous term which is preferred, two-spirited, I use a different term. Let's get their own terms, and then we can classify. No, if we have done survey research for 75 years of our existence, we should be able to classify that. Or the option prefer not to reply. Questions to ask for sex and gender identity. This needs to be incorporated with great promptitude in all our surveys. What sex were you assigned at birth or on your original birth certificate? What is your current gender? This itself helps us to identify with greater clarity, but because it will take 2 questions to capture the real identity, it gives them better protection. Questions for intersex. It's complex, but it needs to be asked. Have you ever been diagnosed by a medical doctor or other medical professional with an intersex condition or difference of sex development when you were born, or when developed naturally, or genitals, reproductive organs, chromosomal patterns that do not fit standard definitions of male or female? So, simple things which we can start by asking. The NAS, from where I have borrowed these questions, has further recommendations saying that this is a way to start. We need to review them, verify them, keep correcting them in keeping with cultural and historical context. The aim is to improve the health and well-being of sexual and gender minorities. Why do we need that? Merely using all-encompassing terms such as gender, transgender, or tiranaki will not serve to capture the complexity of intersections of sex, gender, and sexuality. The Indian context is more complex because of multiple languages, cultures, and other economics of it, all of which is and ethnicities, which all contribute to this complexity. The legal fraternity has made a start demonstrating its initiative in developing guidance for uniformity of labeling in its documents across different lower courts as well. If we are professing to respect the rights of sexual minorities, we need to determine the means of counting them meaningfully to provide for them in a respectful and relevant manner across all contexts. A good starting point would be an inclusive panel of subject experts and other individuals to collate ways and means of identifying, counting, and rendering visible the challenges they face. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your insightful session, ma'am. We are sincerely grateful for your valuable contribution and the profound impact it had in our collective experience. Thank you for being the part of our journey. Thank you very much, ma'am. I would request Professor Vibhuti Patel to provide her remarks.
Thank
Over
you,
to you, ma'am.
Professor Mala Ramanathan, for being so sharp and focused and sticking to the time. And also, I think, very mind-blowing session that we got. And you have given us massive food for thought, because visibility of queer community in statistics, indicators, and data system is very important. This is the first time that we are discussing this issue in Indian context. I know that 30 years back, when we started this exercise of visibility of women in statistics and indicators, how many efforts we had to make to reach out to Indian Statistical Institute, NSSO, census authorities, planning commission, various data gathering agencies, SRS, and all. So I think if you throw the light at how to go about step by step. Now today we got that understood the importance of collection of data. But now how, at a macro level, at a meso level, and wherever we are, how can we do? How can we conduct area studies? How can we do the sectoral analysis? How can we come up with the macro analysis? Can you just throw some light? Because here there are many, many researchers in these participants, among the participants, and some of them also have a mandated power to decide the research agenda. Yeah.
You know, asking in all things in a routine manner. For all people, the two questions which identifies the intersection between sex and gender using two separate questions, you know, and separating them in any administrative in two different blocks like NSSO does, you know, and only linked by, you know, people with authority will really make a good start. The reason why I'm saying in two separate blocks is the technical skill. If you have two different keys, no, then you cannot link these two to identify the sexual orientation identity of individuals. Those two questions in two, I don't know if everyone understands the meaning of two separate blocks. Data is usually collected in different segments and they are entered in different segments. So if you keep them in two different segments and blocked in especially administrative records, in survey research, it doesn't matter because identifiers don't matter. But for administrative records, till we have legislation, if we store it in two blocks with differential keys for, you know, different authority to match, you know, that would enhance security and, you know, make people less afraid, especially because employment will be an issue. That is one in macro data sets. And we need to ask those to start, even if we don't want all the various self-identification. If we leave out intersex, no, that is a difficult question. But the other questions are simple, Dr. Vibhuti, to include in routine surveys, clinical settings, you know, and it would be if it is universal questions to all, including sexist gender groups, then it would stop being stigmatizing.
No, but the ministerial data, say education, skill building, shelter, homeless people, in all these ministries, urban affairs, how do we mainstream queer concerns, no? Because Kerala is the only state which has completed census. Can you throw light on how the processes went about?
I think it was because of the need to make provisioning and the need for South Indian states moving in a certain direction, and how a lot of inclusive engaged activity in Kerala and Tamil Nadu from different groups to legitimize and it all how to visibility not for the cause, champions for the cause, which made it possible to complete the census. And what shall I say, inclusiveness that is being practiced, particularly in Tamil Nadu. Again, Kerala's political will was needed to do this. Tamil Nadu, the inclusion push comes from the communities themselves. So each state's historical and cultural trajectory, you know, Kerala, if there was no political push, there would be no other effort. The politicization of the problem made a difference. In Tamil Nadu, rendering visible the cultural context and the historical trajectory made it possible. Recognition of rights. So each state story is different. And therefore, you know, at each state, at each subgroup level, at how shall I say, let's say rural, urban, you know, macro level is a collective, no? When you look at a composite in a country as diverse as India, you know, there cannot be a macro reality, particularly in a multidimensional concept like this, where meanings vary, words are different. It's simply the nature of stigma is different in different contexts. So we have to sit together and, you know, find the how to say it, converges. Labels converge, things converge, and get that macro picture slowly now. But one state has done it, that can be an example for other states.
Yeah.
Researchers can start work on that, and it gives people now a right to ask for what happened.
Yeah.
Then we can say this many, use the census data and say healthcare provisioning at district level, respectful healthcare provisioning. And people are competitive even across states. The HDI, way back in the 90s made a big thing, whether it was meaningful, while we, mundane statisticians were arguing about the index, states were in competition to outdo each other. No?
Correct. Yeah. Yes, very much.
So we can use correct strategies to anything you have to render it visible.
Yeah. Thank you. There are two more questions for you.
I can't see them.
They are in Q&A. Let Madam Seema Kakran and Lochan Junjunwala, can you unmute and speak? Seema ji? Yeah.
Good evening. Thank you, Professor Ramanathan, for that really enumerating and insightful presentation on how to count gender and sexual minorities. My question was that while you suggest that, looking at the broader national level, NSO could look at different segments and separating sex and gender, are there any interim steps, measures that could be taken? Because that kind of change at the census level may take time, because of the stigmatization. And while there is a recognition of right of the trans persons, but others are still way more perhaps stigmatized to come out and acknowledge. So do you have any suggestions for how enumeration could happen in a,
In surveys, it will be very easy to include these two questions. In surveys, it will be possible. So for every new survey from the next round, we can start arguing for including these questions.
You mean NSSO and SRS?
In SRS also, when they set up the next panel, we can make a request, because see, I thought of NFHS, but NFHS is so reproduction oriented and not identity oriented that they may not quite see why it should be included. We can still try, because see, as a start, we can make a push for just 3 questions. It's not a lot. See, this question on sex is already there. In all things, the question on sex is already there. So it's actually rewording the question on sex and then asking 2 extra questions. It's not there is a cost. I understand large scale surveys, there is always a cost. But SRS is a panel. SRS is a very good place to start. Even more so than
second and third questions.
NSSO we can ask, especially in employment surveys. It can be added in 2 different segments of it in order to protect them. Sir, there is one, oftentimes people prefer not to answer. Yes, I understand that, and it's a very legitimate, clarification how to solve that. My suggestion would be ask everybody. Ask everybody one. Second is say what is advertise extensively, what precautions are being taken to prevent the leakage of identity. You have to build trust. There is no other way. There is no shortcut to that. No? Trust takes time. We need to do that. What else can we do? Because we, as a collective, everybody has behaved so badly. I myself don't know how inclusive I am. And I am educated. And sometimes, stigma is far more concentrated in clusters of the highly educated. So we don't know what is. And therefore, we need to protect.
Yeah, we witnessed that during pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah, and yes, someone is asking, gender blind surveys are better in workplaces. No, I'll tell you why. And institutions don't make provisioning for legitimate needs of women and men and transgender groups. And that becomes an excuse that, we don't have information, so we can't make provisioning. And that I know very well because I've worked on so many gender committees in the various institutions, and gender blind may provide confidentiality, but it will not provide for actual needs.
Hostel, toilets.
Toilets, basic need, toilets.
I think we've all answered all our questions. Moving forward, we would sincerely like to thank Professor Mala Ramanathan ji for attending the session, and also deeply appreciate your insightful comments, remarkable presence, and priceless efforts. Thank you, ma'am. We are truly grateful.
Thank you, and thank you, Vibhuti, and thank you, IMPRI, for giving me a chance to explore this. I actually didn't know that this wasn't talked about. I was misguided enough into thinking everybody knows.
Nobody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
And for starting me on a new direction of thinking. Thank you so much.
The pleasure is all ours, ma'am. Thank you.
The ball rolling. So, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Moving forward, now I would like to request Professor Pushpesh Kumarji to take the session forward. Professor Pushpesh Kumarji is a professor, Department of Sociology, University of Hyderabad. So we'll be taking the session on queer Marxism. Over to you, sir.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Actually, my mother fell ill and I had to travel. So I'm in Bihar and there is no Wi-Fi connection. I'm just using my smartphone to it. So please excuse if the voice and other disturbances are there. Yeah. So I'll be talking about Marxism and queer theory today to the participants. And I'll discuss in brief about Marxist approach towards gender non-conformity and sexual and erotic marginality. I also shed a critical light on why American LGBTQI movement, which became a model, maintained a distance from communism and socialism. And also the emergence of queer theory in 1980s and early 1990s took a cultural and performative turn, which aimed at disrupting the heteronormative without concerning itself with the question of class and material inequality. A group of queer theorists in America, however, made a departure by developing a thorough critique of mere cultural and performative theory and reconsidered queer perspective as a transformatory tool. So I'll just let you travel through this whole trajectory. And I will start with my lecture with one of the very classic articles written by Hedy Hartman in 1979. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, sir.
Okay. So Hedy Hartman's paper.
The video is not coming. So would you like to prefer like that?
They're asking for some kind of update. So I don't know what to do.
Abhi ho gaya, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, please. Sir.
But I can't see any participants. It's fine. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So so Hedy Hartman's Unhappy Marriage Between Marxism and Feminism. And she talks about in this article, in this classic article, she talks about many stances of patriarchal privileges of socialist and Marxist men, which precluded possibilities of incorporating gender and sexualities in revolutionary mobilizational agenda. To Hartman, Sex conflict were not allowed to interfere with class solidarity. Pressure of feminist issues are declining as well. She's writing in this article. Daycare is disappearing from left conferences. Pressures on radical women to abandon this silly stuff. So when women were talking in communist and socialist movement, when women, mobilizations, when women were talking about their own issues, it was labeled as silly stuff and became a serious and they were asking women, the men were asking women to talk about serious issues and do not talk about silly issues. So you can understand uh, the classical left's understanding of gender issues and their reaction towards women who were part of the mobilization. And when they started raising feminist issues, women's issues, then what was the reaction of many revolutionary men? So you will find within the left mobilizations in the West and USSR also you will see there are masculine dominance, heterogender, and heteronorm. Engels' romanticization of pre-industrial family, Hedy Hartman is writing, where men, women, adults, and children work together in family-centered enterprises and all participated in community life. So there was a romanticization of family, the pre-industrial family. Yes, there may be elements of democracy or elements of equality in pre-industrial society, but if you talk about sexual division of labor, if you talk about work burden, enjoyment of leisure, etc., definitely it was very, very discriminatory. But even Engels and many others from the leftist camp, they romanticize the pre-industrial family. So Rosemary Hennessy, who is a materialist feminist and Marxist scholar and a queer theorist, she mentions that both Marx and the canon of Marxism has, with rare exceptions, ignored sexuality, desire, and affect, and simply not seen heteronormativity as a normative institution. Engels died the year Oscar Wilde was arrested, and the, the amendment of the law under which Oscar Wilde was, Wilde's trial was occurred. You might know that Oscar Wilde was tried in maybe after 1885 or something, 1885, the amendment, we checked, when he was tried of sodomy, and he was imprisoned, incarcerated, and he collapsed there, and he ultimately died when he was only 46 years of age. So when this was happening, this criminal law amendment was passed under which Oscar Wilde was tried. It was all happening when Marx and Engels must have been there, must have been alive, or many of the communist leaders and socialist leaders may be alive, may have been alive, but none of them reacted to this. None of them reacted, none of them showed concern to it. This is what Rosemary Hennessy is writing, that so the trial Oscar Wilde is happening in 1895. And I wish to draw attention here towards Alexandra Kollontai. Alexandra Kollontai is a Marxist revolutionary. She was a Marxist revolutionary and Bolshevik Russian politician, diplomat, and a very prominent during Lenin's government. And she wrote on women's freedom. She advocated women's freedom, and she talks about love. Yeah, freedom to love, right? She envisages a worker state in which equality of women's relation had been intended to support and in turn be fostered by a new communist sexual morality. So she is the one who is talking about new communist morality of free, open, and equal relation of love and comradeship. But she On this count, when she's talking about free love and she's talking about women's freedom, etc., she feels herself isolated. Her isolation and lack of political support, she is not able to garner any political support from men who were part of the communist regime. And movement, her isolation and lack of political support for advocating gender and sexual freedom shows how sexuality was cordoned off from socialist class struggle. In 1930, under Stalin, homosexuality in 1934, sorry, it became a criminal offense in USSR. Abortions were made illegal and prostitutes were arrested. To quote Jeffrey Wicks is also a scholar of sexuality, and to quote him, the view that homosexuality was a decadent bourgeois deviation constituted to dominate Marxist orthodoxy after 1930s. So when somebody is coming up coming out as a gay or lesbian, it was supposed to be a bourgeois deviation. So despite leftist subordination of gender question to class struggle and repression of non-heterosexual sexuality, it seems paradoxically intriguing. But now I'm coming to US, United States of America. You see, what was the treatment of, the non-normative sexuality, gender freedom, women's rights, etc., in the very USSR, which is supposed to be the seat of communist experiments and communist bloc during the Cold War era. It was called communist. It represented the communist bloc. It headed the communist bloc, and America headed the capitalist bloc. So what is happening in America now? I will be talking about in those times. So when in leftist USSR, you will find there was subordination of gender question to class struggle and repression of non-heterosexual sexuality because homosexuality became illegal and a criminal offense in 1934 in the USSR. But you look at the paradoxes in the United States of America during 1950s. And what is happening in America in 1950s as far as communism and sexuality is concerned? So what is happening is very interesting for us to understand that the Cold War sexual politics in United States suspected a close alliance between homosexuals and communists. And why? Can anybody tell me? While on the one hand, you will see that in USSR, what is happening is that the homosexuals were persecuted, the women's freedom was discouraged, the sex conflict was not talked about, etc. And homosexuality became a criminal offense in 1934. But why in 1950s in America, communists and homosexuals were regarded by American authority as they are in close alliance? Because this was the era of Cold War between USSR and the US. And the US represented the capitalist bloc and USSR represented the communist bloc. And in the capitalist America, they thought that communists were also subversive and homosexuals are also subversive. And then there is a close alliance between the communists and the homosexuals. And that led to mass persecution of gay and lesbian subjects during 1950s. And the scare of communists was called Red Scare, and the scare of the homosexuals was called Lavender Scare. So this was the time of Red Scare and Lavender Scare in America. So both lavender means erotically marginalized subjects, and red means representing the communists. So Red Scare and Lavender Scare during 1950s, and American authority thought that there has been an overlapping concern because of the subversive mode of existence of the communists and of the homosexuals. So there is an overlap between the homosexuals and the communists, and the homosexual, it was regarded that homosexual employee of the federal government in America, what they will do, they will share the secrets of American state to communist law, right? So, and this was happened during the time of an American senator whose name is McCarthy, right, who took over in 1950, and probably he continued till 1959. And this was a panic thing in America about homosexuality, homosexual repression, and communist repression in America. Gay men were attributed to have unconventional morality and were constructed as vulnerable to black men. So there was an understanding in among American authority, and media was also giving fuel to it, and media was also advertising it. Media was also reinforcing this kind of understanding that gay men have unconventional morality and they are vulnerable to blackmail. So communists can blackmail them and they will divulge the secrets of American state to the communists. They could divulge the secrets of American states to the enemy camp or the communists through blackmail, and hence posed a serious economic threats. To McCarthy, homosexuals were unusual individuals who are active members of communist front organization and they are Soviet agents. Majority of newspapers fostered this understanding, and people feared both communist cells and homosexual nets within federal government. As you know, the federal jobs in America means the government jobs in America. So, what was the fear generated by the authorities? They started constructing a fact that that federal jobs or federal administrative structure are full of communist cells. So there are communist cells within federal governance, and there are also homosexual nets, and they are in alliance. There were several committees instituted to detect perverts in civil services, and between 1945 to 1960s, thousands of gays, lesbians lost their federal jobs. They were thrown out of their jobs, right? An unknown number of gay men and lesbians stripped of their livelihoods, facing embarrassment and unemployment, took their own lives. And there's a book by David Johnson, which is called Lavender Scare. And if you read Lavender Scare, these all things are brought out in the book very beautifully. Lavender Scare and separation of gays created a rigid boundary between homosexuality and heterosexuality. Confronted with the possibility of being labeled, some abandoned same-sex behavior while others adopted a new identity and became part of the gay subculture. So you will see that many people adopted the what is called the normative way of life. They abandoned same-sex behavior. So you will find in 1950s in America, because gay and lesbians were thought to be friends of the communist people, and through communist network, they will divert the secrets of states of United States of America, American government to the USSR. That was the Lavender Scare and many persecution. And then you will come to know, if you read this book by David Johnson, that many of the lesbians and gay people had to commit suicide because they were thrown out of the job. This was the time again in which you have the coming up. As I said in the beginning, I will try to explain why the gay movement in America, when it was started, at the gay assertions or the subculture, which started in 1950, if you see in this Cold War context, you will see that it is completely disassociating itself from the communist movement, the socialist movement. Why? They were living in a climate of fear, where the moment you articulate that you are close to communism means you are you can share the secrets, or you are a criminal or anything. So the first gay organization was formed in 1950 in California by Harry Hay. There was a person called Harry Hay and his friends that determined the direction and trajectory of gay protest till 1970. The organization was called Matheson Society. Due to the fear generated through lavender scare, the Matheson Society could not adopt a confrontationist approach and limit itself to civil rights. It dissociated completely from communism as it was reduced to a major security threat to a nation. So communism is a major security threat to the nation. So it has to be dissociated completely from communism. It was only in 1965 that gay and lesbian took to streets. So they were not taking to the streets. They were trying to convince the mainstream society that they are as loving, as good as the mainstream society. So politics of convincing and asking for certain civil rights, they confined to that, and they disassociated themselves from a very confrontationist approach because they were living in a climate of fear in United States of America. So it was only in 1965, that they are coming to streets for the first time. But still the protests were in the realm of civil rights. And they were asking for civil rights. So Marxism is not only about civil rights, it is also about your economic and rights and fundamental restructuring of society, fundamental reworking of class relations, right? And this equality of income and wealth. So civil rights is only a formal equality. So American gay movement, because it dissociated from Marxism and communism as even at ideological level, so there was complete absence of Marxism within American movement, American gay movement, gay liberation movement when it started. Post Stonewall, as all of you know, that Stonewall riot happened in 1969. So after Stonewall riot, you will find the emergence of new left movement in America. What is the new left and how it is different from the old left? The old left is talking about class struggle, class relation, restructuring of society, etc. But new left, but they were ignoring the questions of sexuality. They were ignoring the questions of feminist questions because it was dominated by men. So you will find that around 1960s in America, you will find late 1960s, you may find that, or mid 1960s, many movements are taking place, you know. So women's are asking for their liberation, blacks are asking for their liberation, working class movement, trade union movement, and simultaneously you will find that gay, lesbian, or LGBTQ people are also kind of asking for their rights. But the question is that whether New Left was talking about class conflict or historical materialism, which are very central to Marxist issues. You will find that these movements are talking, they were not right-wing movements, but they turned a kind of identitarian movement and asking for their specific rights. And then you will find there is a kind of not very seriously engaging with the issues of restructuring society as the Marxist and communist theories would might advise. So, so New Left was a bit, as I said, identitarian, that adopting a revolutionary Marxist agenda and strategies. By 1975, in the autumn, a publication called Gay Left appears in Britain, right? So there is a magazine, or which is called Gay Left, which was started. Its publication started in Great Britain. The influential writers included Jeffrey Wicks, as I have quoted him in the beginning. Jeffrey Wicks was also a sociologist, and and also a historian of sexuality, you can say. Then Frank Mott from Britain, and he wrote about medicine, prostitution, law, legislation, and regulations, etc. There was a film critic, Richard Dyer, Simon Watney, who wrote on media, Bob Kahn. So these were the people who were writing associated with the gay left. Writers like Mary McIntosh, uh, then Dennis Altman, etc. All made up their contribution to gay left. But again, you see, as I said, gay left. So what they did theoretically, if you see, ideologically, if you see, they synthesized the works of Antonio Gramsci, Sigmund Freud, and Michel Foucault. So they were no more as pure left in that sense, old pure left. So they were making a lot of experimentations, and they were synthesizing the theory of Antonio Gramsci, and many of you know might have heard about hegemony. Hegemony is associated with Antonio Gramsci. And Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud is not a Marxist, right? But they are trying to synthesize Sigmund Freud, psychoanalysis, and Antonio Gramsci, and Michel Foucault. And Michel Foucault is sometimes regarded as postmodernist or post-structuralist. So post-structuralist, psychoanalysis, and certain Marxist ideas are synthesized in the writings of New Left. So New Left was a different kind of experiment. In 1970s, the center of gay left is shifted to North America, and these writers of gay left included John D. Emilio. But Emilio is talking about capitalism, and he's also talking about the desire. He's also talking about sexuality. Gay community, there was a gay community news that was started, and the prominent figure are Michael Bronski and Urvashi Bad. In San Francisco, lesbian and gay history project were started. These were part of the gay left project, you know, and Gail Rubin and Jeffrey Escobar, these were the figures. In New York, you will find Lisa Dugan, Nan Hunter, and Jonathan Katz. These were the people who were associated with history project and belong to gay left. So despite being cultural and identitarian, gay left challenged the myth that LGBT community is an economically privileged cultural elite. So what was the understanding of the old left? So the old left thought that, you know, homosexuality is a bourgeois deviance, right? But this myth was demolished by the new gay left movement, and they said people from LGBTQI community come from different classes, and that economy shapes the lives of all LGBT community members who come from all social classes and all occupations. So this was the contribution of New Left. Then in 1980, you will find again what becomes very prominent in gay movement, gay academics, and also in practice, you will find that Judith Butler becomes very important in 1980. And there was a politics in American academia, as you will see. So American academia wants to discourage Marxism from academia, and they want to privilege certain cultural studies, you know, or which was also called cultural turn, right? A cultural turn in academia. So they will talk about performance, performativity, disruption of identities, disruption of the coherence, etc. And you will find suddenly Judith Butler becomes a very prominent figure in American academia and also in queer theory. And what is the contribution of Judith Butler? Then you will find many of you might know performativity, and then with performativity, what happens in queer theory? There is an eclipse of leftist concern. So when Judith Butler is talking about performance, there is no leftism in that understanding, that theory. She's not talking about class. Later on, she started talking about precarity and other things. But at this moment of time, when she enters American academia, American philosophy as a scholar, as a queer scholar, she discusses the whole questions, you know, of left, the concerns of the left. Rosemary Hennessy, who is a queer leftist thinker, she writes that the rise of right in 1980s was a time of crisis for Marxism in academia. It was also the decade when cultural studies began to flourish in academia, whose retreat from Marxism and rush to Foucauldian approach. So what was there? There was a rush to Foucault's ideas. So deviating from Marx's ideas and clinging more to Foucauldian ideas, Foucault's ideas, So rush to Foucauldian approach virtually dominated the analysis of sexuality. Gender is, so what is the understanding of Butler? In some, I mean, it's very complex and it's very big, which I cannot bring everything from Butler here. But the essence of Butler's theory is that gender is a repeated performance of cultural signs and conventions. So what is gender? Gender is a performance. And while performing gender, what you do, you repeat the cultural signs and convention. She also says that gender is a stylized performance of body. So what is the stylized performance of body? The way you walk, the way you talk, the way you exchange smiles, the way you exchange handshakes or whatever, right? That's a performance. It's a stylized performance of body. And through this repetitive performance of cultural signs and convention, gender is produced, reproduced, and she's talking about citationality. You cite every time the signs and convention which is set out through gender, as gender norms. It constitutes a precarious. So for Butler also, when this is a performance, there is always a chance of precarity of this performance. And she calls it, it constitutes a precarious fabrication and it always potentially at risk, right? So when you are performing masculine, you might be at risk of not performing that. There may be slippages. It's a precarious fabrication. So when it is a precarious fabrication, it may be disrupted. And she talks about drag. So this performance is potentially at risk according to Butler. To Hennessy, Butler's emphasis on norms injects into post-structuralist textualized understanding of identity as a signification, a social and historical analysis. We should not get into this complexity, but we need to get into mind that how Butler's ideas becomes very, very textual. And through her idea, people are looking at films, people are looking at text. Film is also a text and many other texts and context to look at the performativity and what is the flaw in this performance and how to read, how to interpret. So textualization becomes, and textual tradition becomes very, very important. Understanding the materiality of social life as exclusively normative. So Rosemary Hennessy, who is a Marxist, queer theorist and queer scholar, who is saying that Butler talks about the materiality. And what is this materiality? Materiality of normative gender constructs and materiality of these repetitive performances of norms. So for Butler, it is normative, but for Marx, what is the idea of materiality? So Marxist idea of materiality. So Butler is talking about materiality of body, which is important, but she is ignoring the materiality of historical materialism, which foregrounds the idea of labor, which foregrounds the idea of labor relation, exploitation, etc., and which is also important for queer theory, right? So Butler is talking about a different kind of materiality, and Marxism is talking about a different kind of materiality. So Butler is operating within the realm of culture, right? Where Marxist theory is operating within the material or economics and then trying to link it to the culture. And that is the difference between Butler's construction of materiality of body and Marxist construction of materiality of existence. And they are, they relate to each other in a way, but there is also a major difference. There is also a fundamental difference, right? So the materiality of historical materialism and materiality of normative body are different. Historical materialism, as I said, places labor at the center, connecting it to cultural ideology, that is normative, and then law. That part of material production of social life. But there are queer theorists who go against the grain. So even if Butler is a very dominant figure in queer theory, but there are other, queer theorists who talk about materiality of social life and materiality of body and culture, and they try to link it up. And the list of queer Marxist theorists include David Evans, Nicola Field, Kevin Floyd, Donald Morton, and Rosemary Hennessy herself. While Butler talks about queer visibility through performative disruptions such as drag, and what he talks about how drag constitutes a disruption of this naturality of gender. Drag mocks at the naturality of gender, right? And she also talks about a proliferation of gender identity. So whatever regulation is doing, whatever law is doing, however law is constructing, culture is constructing, you have historically the evidence of deviant bodies. In all historical time periods, in all contexts, in all cultural contexts, you may find that there are trans people, there are queer people, there are gay, there are lesbians, there are bisexuals, and Freud talks about universal bisexuality. Each one of us are potentially a bisexual. But if you read Lacan, he talks about how we follow the law of society. And what is the law of society? The law of society is culture. And we follow that, we imitate that. So Freud is also talking about culturally sanctioned libido. What is sanctioned for us, we try to fit into that. But potentially, Freud is also talking about polymorphous perversity. We all are perverse, and there is a polymorphous perversity within all of us. So, Hennessy says that visibility of social identity. So, what is Butler is emphasizing? That people should LGBTQI people should be visible. They should disrupt the cultural norms through their presence, through their performances. So, but Hennessy is saying that visibility of social identity in late capitalist consumption is often a matter of commodification. So many of you might know drag performances, and in India also drag culture has started little before the reading down of Section 377 in 2018, but it has intensified post-NALSA and also post-reading down of 377 of the Indian Penal Code and legalizing homosexuality in India. There are lots of drag performances happening, but where the performance, where are the space of this performance mostly? So there are exceptional people in India also, like I forgot her, Aptari Devi. Aptari Devi is from Bihar. She's a PhD from Delhi University. She has taken the identity of Londa, right? And a very subaltern identity in her performativity, in her articulation, in her ideas, in her theoretical explanation, etc. So they are the exception. But if you look at drag performances and queer events and queer issues, etc., mostly where they are organized, where they're talked about in maybe 3 stars or 5-star hotels, the pubs and clubs, all the elite spaces. So she's saying that it is a matter of, so this kind of performances of disruption, of cultural performance of diversity, etc., and visibility is a matter of consumption and a matter of commodification in the late capitalist period. In Marxist understanding, social is the domain of extraction and so, for example, if a drag performance is happening, all of us are buying a ticket. Sometimes it is free, but sometimes there is a ticket of 300, 400, 500, right? So who can afford to go, right? And it is happening in an elite space. When it is free, you are expected to buy food and beverages from the pub and club and drink So who can afford these drinks? Who can afford this food? Who can afford that, etc. So there is a culture of commodification and consumption through which visibilities and queer culture are materialized in late capitalist America or India or anywhere, in the globe. So in Marxist understanding, so who has made that stage or space has made amenable for the performance of drag, right? It is the hidden labor of some people, right? And if you are accessing it freely as queer people, it is the extraction of labor from certain entities, certain classes of people, which have made it possible. And at the cost of their exploitation, you are performing drag in a pub, in a club, in a five-star hotel, etc. So you are having a visual pleasure and you are disrupting the naturality of gender within the moment, but at whose cost? At what cost? Right? So Marxism talks about the domain of extraction and appropriation of surplus in human relation based on exploitation, which cannot be simply transformed through playfulness and performative subversion. So Judith Butler talks about playfulness of gender and performative subversion, or through exotic and spectacular. So if I'm wearing a drag and I'm disrupting the gender nature, is that enough for queer politics? So Rosemary Hennessy, as a queer scholar, is saying, no, this is not enough. We have to understand that queer people are also coming from different classes. If you look at some trans women who are coming from Dalit background, they have not even heard the word of drag. So then this culture of visibility and queer performativity becomes very, very elitist. Very, very elitist project. And then you are also participating in capitalist inequality, which is not transformatory, right? So this is what is talked about in Marxist understanding. Social is the domain of extraction and appropriation of surplus in human relations based on exploitation. This cannot be simply transformed through playfulness and performative subversion or through exotic and spectacular. Hennessy writes, so she's talking about American visibility, gay, queer culture. She said, chants like, we are here, we are queer, get used to it. And accents like queer, bass back. You can see in the dictionary, or I mean, you can Google it, what is queer bass back, bass parties. You might have heard of. These are part of the gay subculture. Queer night out, queer kissings and mall zaps, right? Mall zaps, in the shopping malls, a lot of activities are happening which disrupt for the moment, the naturality of gender, and it call attention to queer issues. These are mall zaps which ushered in public reclaiming of queerness in early 1900s. So which are the spaces where you're going? You're not going to a labor colony and performing all of that and consuming all those items. So mall zaps, where are you? Where it is happening? So public reclaiming of queerness in early 1990s, all this public reclaiming of queerness in public spaces were aimed at making visible those identities that are ubiquitous, uh, as parallel to heteronormative culture, which heteronormative culture is trying to erase. And you want to make it ubiquitous in spaces like mall or hotels or wherever. So queer visibility of such kind in late capitalism is often a matter of commodification that invariably depends upon life and labor of others. Hennessy draws illustration of Butler's reading of, Butler wrote a book, uh, Undoing Gender, probably I forgot that name, Undoing Gender, and in which she's giving an example of Harlem balls. Where is Harlem balls? You must have heard of ball and drag culture. So Harlem ball is located in probably Manhattan, New York, right? So there was a documentary made on this Harlem ball, which is called Paris is Burning. And this documentary was made by somebody called Livingstones. It is an American documentary. Paris is burning. So Butler is citing an example of Paris is burning, and she's trying to say how it denaturalizes the gender, but it also re-idealizes the gender norms. So Hennessy is giving a Marxist queer reading to Harlem Boys. And Hennessy cites the example of Venus Extravaganza, who is a black trans woman, who is also performing in her Harlem Balls. She's an American transgender who is struggling to save money out of sex work for sex reassignment surgery and dreaming of a rich lifestyle, who was killed by her client upon discovering that she is a man. She has a penis, because she's a trans woman, and the client discovers that she doesn't have a vagina, she has a penis, and she was killed. Because Venus has male genitalia. The murder of Venus is not a playful subversion. So Rosemary Hennessy is saying that the murder of Venus Extravaganza is not a playful subversion of gender identity in Hennessy's understanding. It rather speaks of vulnerabilities of person of low class position and marginal racial background, as she contrasts Venus with Willy Ninja. If you haven't heard the name of Willy Ninja, so I can just tell you that Willy Ninja is considered as the godfather of a dance art called voguing. And he was the inspiration from Madonna's Vogue music video. So Willy Ninja, right, he is coming from a privileged background. He's also coming to Harlem Balls. So Willy Ninja, who made it as a gay man into the mainstream of celebrity glamour. Hennessy writes that Venus is ultimately treated the way most poor women of color are treated in the United States of America. So if you're black, right, and if you are driving a car, the police in the United States of America will stop you several times and check your documents, check your paper. Whereas if you are a white person, you will not be checked as many times as black are checked, right? If you look at the prisons of America, so incarceration of black people, incarceration of white people, how many white people are there in the prison houses and how many black people are there? And when you are a black woman, then you become more vulnerable. And when you are a black trans woman, then you are the most vulnerable entity in the United States of America. And there is an article written on being black and trans and how it is difficult to traverse the streets of Washington, D.C. So when you are a black and a trans, traversing the streets, walking in the streets also becomes painful exercise for you. What time police will interrogate you, what time police will incarcerate you, what time police will beat you or even murder you. And if you look at the murders happening in United States of America, often there are a lot of murders happening, but most of these trans women are black in United States of America.
Mr. Pushpish Kumar,
Yeah.
you have given a fascinating narrative of 200 years. You have encapsulated in it. So we are all engrossed, but I think due to paucity of time, you will have to wrap up.
Sure.
So we have two more.
I was about to end.
And there are questions also which you can answer in the chat box.
Very difficult. I'm in a difficult place.
Because
anyway,
the last, what I was asked about the gender-based violence. Now you have covered that also. Yeah.
Can you read out the questions for me?
Yeah, there are questions. One is, what was the article or book's name you referred to that was published in 1979? That is from Luchan Junjunwala. And this Victor Banerjee is asking, as you envisage Butler's epistemology of citationality that align with Kosowski's work of speech and act, how do you relate this whole discourse through the critical lens of visual theory, sir?
Let me go through the question again.
Yeah.
We could ask the
Yeah, Mr. You can speak. You can unmute and speak. Mr. Victor, yeah.
keeping the time limit in mind.
Yeah.
We could ask Victor ji, please ask your question, and I hope we wrap it
Yeah,
up.
yeah, I can actually ask now. Very wonderful
Yeah,
presentation.
you can ask the question. I can't find it here. I'm just in a
Okay.
place where I don't have access to a good Wi-Fi.
Understood. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
sir. In fact, like I was actually reading the work of Jonathan Dolly Moore, where he actually offered a very good critique to Butler's work of performativity. And now that you are talking about the citationality, because Butler has talked on citationality through the work of Kozlovsky's, in which the speech, the situation of I in terms of constative and etiolatic speech plays a very paramount role. So I was actually thinking that how you can relate this whole debate through the lens of wishful theory, because wishful theory actually talks about postmodernism, but it also says that it is an intellectually totalizing and a reductive endeavor, which is kind of self-empowering in a political spurious way. And despite its ostentatious performance of high sophistication, it kind of tend to erase the psychic, social, and historical complexity. So how you can actually relate this thing? I am very, very curious to know your opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe very complex question. What I was trying to focus on is that, when queer theory starts in 1980s, yeah, and Butler becomes a very prominent scholar, right? And how she's talking about materiality of body, she's talking about performance, she's talking about disruption of the naturality of gender. So all those things are important, very important. I don't deny them. I can't put the baby out with the bathwater. What I was talking about, citing Rosemary Hennis's work, which is called Profit and Pleasure and Commodification of Queer Culture. Just two words I have referred to, commodification of something. I forgot the exact title of the article. So there she's talking about a different kind of materiality. And somehow these two materialities have to talk together, has to be combined together. Whereas Butler is missing out on the materialism, historical materialism, where labor is at the central place, right? So even if there is a performativity, there is a disruption, there is a denaturalizing of gender happening in certain spaces, these spaces are very, very capitalist spaces within queer culture. And then when you are doing it, you are doing at the cost of some exploitation of others, the hidden labor of others, without addressing that exploitation. And when you don't address those exploitation, those appropriation and extraction of labor, sometimes unpaid or very low paid kind of labor, right? If it is in America, the labor may be provided by Latin American people who are paid very low, right? Because they are illegal immigrants, they don't have proper documents, then you are not, as a queer, you're not addressing this issue of exploitation of labor, which historical materialism foregrounds and places at the center. And then this materiality minus only bodily materiality of norm and disrupting the norms, of course, being within the normative and law, right, doesn't make a movement revolutionary, doesn't make a movement transformatory enough. So why the Black women's movement were raising a question to white women's movement, saying that when the white women wants to get out of the kitchen, the Black women wants to enter the kitchen, right? So how the material world are so different. So unless and until white feminist addresses this material inequality, the movement of white feminists cannot be liberatory. Similarly here, that question of class, materialism, commodification, etc., is not being foregrounded. So these two materialities are not connected together. Then the queer movement cannot be liberatory. And that is what queer Marxism is trying to talk about. I don't know whether I have answered your question, but this is how I have try to articulate.
Just a small doubt. I just have a small doubt. Like when you were talking about the unhidden voices or say the marginal racialization, do you think that we can connect it with the Franz Fanon's epistemology of affective anaphylaxis also? Would you just like to answer it in short way?
I am not familiar with what work you're citing, so I'm not
Like
competent
Franz
enough
Fanon's
to answer.
affective anaphylaxis, in which the black bodies are seen as something which causes irritation, like not a bodily irritation, but a social irritation. So, and how it actually
Of
affects
course,
the mood.
these kind of articulations are definitely connected. Though I have not read the work you're citing, and I'm not competent enough to attempt this question to answer. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Pushpesh Kumar. It was a really very, very mind-blowing session. So many new ideas have come up. And I think still the post-colonial queer movement, I think in the next lecture, you can take up that also, that the post-colonial queer theorists have also come up with the analysis of North-South inequity and inequality in India.
Thank you for the opportunity, Professor Patel.
Yeah, thank you.
Professor Kumar, I think we have a question. A request to be correct here. It's regarding your email. If you could please share your email. Sakshi ji has asked for your email, and Sakshi ji, if you could please go ahead with the question through the email. Given we are running short of time, and if Professor could answer the question in the Q&A section. Moving ahead, with utmost admiration, we extend our deepest gratitude for your presence, words, and extraordinary essence you've brought to our shared experience, sir. Thank you very much. We would be moving forward to our next speaker. Okay, moving forward, I would request Mr. Adhiraj Parasarthi ji to start the session. Adhiraj ji is an independent policy consultant. He will be taking the session on issues in queer mental health care in an Indian context, aging, substance abuse, and access. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Are you able to see the slides? Hello.
Yeah. We are able to see you.
Yeah. Not the slides.
Okay. Hold on. I'll just now can you see the slides?
Yes. It's in working mode, not slideshow.
Okay, great. So I'm Adhiraj Parasarthi, and this session is going to be a brief session. I will stay on in time, and we're going to talk broadly about certain issues relating to mental health and well-being amongst the LGBT community in India, particularly from an India-centric context, and broadly cover themes, research, and potential policy interventions in this space in light of evolving understanding that has developed in the last few years about specifically LGBT-related mental health concerns. Specifically, we will also try to discuss two particular issues which have not really been focused on in the past in a significant manner. One of them being aging as an issue, because this is the first time in recent memory that we have a significant population of LGBT individuals who identify as LGBT individuals who are reaching reaching a stage in their life where they're older, and this is the first time we will have a significant population of aging LGBT groups that have their own specific needs. So very broadly, what I want to do is I'm just going to give you an overview of the existing trends and in mental health and well-being, then review the existing data and research that is available in and the studies that have been done focusing on these issues. And then quickly take you through an overview of the health system, societal and policy interventions um, that are evidence-based and that can work to address and mitigate some of the emerging concerns in this space. And also specifically, I'm also going to talk about how things have changed in the last 20 odd years since the first decriminalization of homosexuality in 2009, and what the world was like just before that, and how things have changed since 2009 to today in 2023. Before I start, I just want, can you guys read this? Is it clear enough?
Yeah. No, it is hazy.
Okay. So this is an extract. I'm sorry, the print is not clear enough. This is an extract from 1977 book that was written by Shakuntala Devi, who's mostly known for being the prominent, better known for being a prominent mathematical wizard, but she also wrote one of the earliest pioneering books in an Indian context that dealt with homosexuality and issues around it. And it is remarkable for its entirely uncritical, unbiased, and empathetic portrayal of the struggle that homosexual men went through back in the 70s. So what she does in her book is published in 1976, she interviews a number of gay men in India, and they all talk about, they all have a similar story to narrate. And this is an extract. I'm sorry, the print is not clear enough. I will quickly read to you the relevant extracts from this. So she meets someone who is an openly gay man in 70s India, and she is talking to him about the various issues he's facing, being a cis gay man in the Indian context. And so she asks him, what was your family's reaction to you being out? So what basically, and I'll read this out to you, is what was your parents' reaction? Not only did they marriage proposals started coming. My father could not believe it and brushed it aside, saying, "But you feel this way now," referring to his homosexuality. "But wait till you marry, then you will feel attracted towards a woman." According to him, I was fit for marriage because I could achieve an erection and could ejaculate semen. But he did not believe that only men and not women could sexually arouse me. He insisted on marriage. I faced the dilemma. Should I marry or should I not? I wanted to marry because without marriage, there was no social status. There would be problems of loneliness, food, nursing, during illness, and the rest. Ultimately, I sought psychiatric aid at the age of 28. The doctor gave me psychotherapy. After about 10 sessions, my sexual preference still remained the same. Then at the age of 31, I again sought his as well as another psychiatrist's advice and decided not to marry. He has suggested I try newly developed behavioral therapy, but I don't know whether I really want to change. This is just one brief snippet. The book has dozens of other similar narratives like this. Gay men who go to seek mental health treatment, possibly because of family pressure, possibly because they think it can be changed and homosexuality can be changed. And then they realize that, you know, the entire mental health care system is not geared to deal with well-adjusted homosexuals. And I know this is a dated piece from the 1970s, but a lot has changed since then, but a lot has still stayed the same. If you look at the articles that I had shared with you, they talk about the evolution of the psychiatric profession's treatment of attitudes towards homosexuality. Unlike in other parts of the world, I think the stand that was taken in an Indian context was consistent to the extent that it was not seen as an illness from the 90s onwards. Although you had individual doctors who said, you know, that there are treatments available that can help you possibly become straight, that was not necessarily the case as a profession. They did not necessarily say that you can change things, but the overwhelming preference was, the overwhelming ideology was that you will be happier if you are married, if you have a woman in your life, and that you have to keep up appearances because you have to be well adjusted. So the idea that, this sort of life where one could be a well-adjusted, openly LGBT person is a relatively new context, a new idea within the Indian psychiatric and mental health care professions. So moving forward, I just want to take you through this because this is intended as a sort of overview of what the current discourse is pertaining to mental health care. So LGBT population groups in India have very specific health concerns and issues, and it would not be fair to generalize and cover the entire gamut in the review of literature of all the different kinds of segments that are covered in this. So most of the existing research that exists in the South Asian context is specifically, and I know this word is deeply unfashionable in today's context, but most of the research in the South Asian context focuses on MSMs, men who have sex with men. And this is a very unfashionable term now, but it continues to be reproduced in the medical literature. And it is a term that essentially pathologizes and is a clinical term, which does not really link up with lived experience. But so very broadly, because there is still some benefit in using this as a conceptual category, I will just take you quickly through what the research says in a South Asian context about MSMs, both people that are have come out of the closet and people who are in heterosexual relationships but have sex with men. And then secondly, there is an additional segment, which is transgender individuals who have mental health concerns.
I think some connection issues. I'll check with sir.
Yeah.
We seem to have lost Parasarthi ji. Do we wait for him? So,
I'm trying his phone.
Are you able to contact him, Dr. Arjun Kumar?
अभी लग गया ना.
लग गया?
in the meantime, ma'am, we could discuss this question by. Yes, I think I've lost the name here.
Sir is trying to join.
Sneha ji. Okay.
We can do the questions till then.
Yeah. Ma'am, if you could please answer this question. This was a very informative, important presentation. So it was for Professor Kumar. We could, discuss it while we are waiting for
Yeah,
Sir.
take it.
As you talked about the neoliberal and capitalist aspect of gender subversion and mentioned that just a playful subversion of gender is not enough for queer politics, I was wondering what are your thoughts about the effects of the current debate on transgender backlash in America because of Dylan Mulvaney and rainbow washing by brands on Indian queer politics? Ma'am, if you could.
They're asking Dr. Pushpish Kumar, no? Where is he there?
No, I think we don't have them here.
Yeah.
If you could.
Yeah, I think currently it is not only in
question.
US. I think it is all over the world. The backlash on transgender community is very high. You saw the question, the incidences of going on in some of the Nordic countries, which are supposed to be quite progressive. There also you have seen this backlash, and especially in the post-COVID era, where overall 40% of the people are out of job. So I think there is a lot of unemployment. Youth unemployment is also very high. Identity politics and polarization is also very, very pronounced. And this whole neoliberal logic, no, of complete concentration and centralization of all the resources in the hands of microscopic minority, and that also then the only monolithic understanding of this thing, a lot of inward looking mentality, no? So whether it is a white supremacy or the supremacy of particular racial supremacy, so attacks on minority, attacks on migrant, attacks on those who are at the margin of the economy, I think they have increased. And within that framework, I can see the increasing attacks on the transgender community, because who are the sections which are considered to be sponge on the economic resources are shrinking, the space for better livelihood are shrinking. At that time, those who are at the margin of the economy and margin of society, their vulnerability increases. They are the ones who are homeless. They are the ones who are, and that we saw here in most of the countries where after the pandemic, the homelessness among transgender community has increased. The 4 or 5 studies which TISS has done has also shown that the precarity of the transgender and queer community has enhanced exponentially. That also increases their vulnerability and in higher incidences of violence, both the self-inflicted violence as well as the societal violence. No, so I think this the welfare state is now completely withdrawing its responsibilities, and it is the state is becoming more and more for surveillance.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, my apologies for that. So I'll quickly move ahead. So what I was saying is that most of the current research that exists in this space is primarily focused on MSMs and on transgender individuals, and there is limited data and limited research that has been done on the mental health, well-being, and concerns of sexual minority women and other identities. So the focus of this will primarily be on cis cis gay and bisexual men. So moving forward, so what we know, I'm going to start with what the bad news is, and then I'll move on to tell you how things have improved over the years. So I think it's not a leap of the imagination to say that, you know, and this has always been the case, that LGBT populations have had a higher prevalence of mental health concerns, of mental health issues historically, and that continues to be the globally also, and that continues to be the case in an Indian context. But what is sort of astounding is the prevalence of mental health issues that remain untreated amongst in the limited studies that have been done in an Indian context. So for instance, these are just some numbers that I'm putting up here. As many as 52% of, again, to use that problematic word, MSMs in India have some psychiatric morbidity, with the incidence of severe depression in the past 12 months being more than 12%. Transgender youth in particular have a remarkably high rate of suicidal ideation and a history of at least one suicide attempt in the past 12 months. This is 1 in 3 transgender youth that we're talking about. And along with this comes a spiral of substance abuse, which is frequent alcohol usage, for example. The prevalence of that is between 17 to 20% amongst gay and bisexual men, and as high as 40% in the few studies that are available relating to this. There is also, disturbingly, and these numbers are increasing, recreational polysubstance use is also significant. So on every indicator of mental health, LGBT populations have significantly worse long-term outcomes, are doing worse than the general population, but also they are significantly less likely to seek, even if offered services for free, they're significantly less likely to avail mental health care services or seek treatment of any kind. And if you look back at the passage from Shakuntala Devi, which I shared with you a couple of slides earlier, that was in 1975. And even in 1975, that person she interviewed says that I don't think I will get any tangible benefit from going to a mental health care professional, because what is he going to say? He's going to try to cure me. It will not work out. I know it will not work out. And the real issues that I have, I'm a well-adjusted person, but the issues of acceptance, the issues of discrimination, prejudice that I'm facing, there is nothing that can be done to resolve those issues. So moving on, now that the statistics show that, as I've shown you in the earlier slide, that there are significantly worse outcomes for LGBT populations relating to mental health. There are various models that are used to sort of theorize why this is, and in particular one that is extensively used is the minority stress model, which helps explain the cause of the high prevalence of mental health concerns in LGBT populations. What it primarily does is it distinguishes between distant stressors like discrimination, like stigma, whether real or imagined, isolation, and proximal stressors like isolation, loneliness, internalized homophobia. So here are very broadly some of the issues that, and this is covered more extensively in the paper that I have shared also, that LGBT populations face. And this really is not a particularly surprising or astounding piece of information, because the debilitating consequences of whether real or imagined stigma and prejudice that one encounters have take a significant mental toll on one. And other elements like lack of adequate family support and acceptance, lack of role models and community support, intimate partner violence, low self-esteem, discrimination, societal expectations, and so on. Those really have not changed over time. And what is unfortunate is that we have not we have not evolved any adequate means of addressing these issues, whether in a therapeutic setting, either through sensitizing the mental health care professionals that work in this space, or identifying creative solutions, holistic solutions to deal with these issues. So moving on, broadly, what else does the research tell us? I mean, all is not lost. I've listed out in the previous slide an overview of the issues commonly faced, which is like a laundry list of common concerns that are not particularly unique to to sexual minorities. These are problems that are universal with minorities and mental health issues. Now, the research in an Indian context, what does it tell us? That, after the decriminalization of homosexuality, reading down of Section 377, in 2021, when as many as 3 in 4 LGBT individuals continue to believe that their identity needs to be kept secret. And they are not comfortable with the idea, with the notion of coming out, of accepting their own identity. So when we talk about queer identities, we have to realize that a significant a portion of this population don't necessarily see themselves even as belonging to a particular queer identity, but they continue to face the brunt of the issues, the mental health issues that are associated with this. So amongst LGBT individuals, as many as 3 in 4 continue to believe that their identity needs to be kept secret. Over half of, again, to use MSMs, are in heterosexual marriages, and as many as 3/4 of self-identified bisexual women. So now, broadly, also, things have changed. To say that things are the same way that they were in 2009 might not be entirely accurate. Certain things in an Indian context are very clearly linked with better outcomes, both from a mental health care point of view and from overall well-being and quality of life indicators. And it is interesting because the things that are determinants of better outcomes vary according to which segment you're talking about. So for gay men, because once again, coming out is not a one-time experience. Coming out is something people have to do their entire life. Every time you meet someone new, the entire process of coming out starts again. But in broadly, not without generalizing, determinants of better outcomes are a positive coming out experience in the early stages when you first come out, and the support particularly from female family members. Further, contact with the accessibility and contact with well-adjusted role models of peers, people that are, potentially other people from the community, access to them, ability to interact with them, that I think is a significant determinant of better outcomes. For lesbians and for sexual minority women, familial acceptance and a stable, intimate partner relationship are broadly two determinants of better outcomes. And in general, for transgender individuals, acceptance by family and high education levels are similarly determinants. One issue that I think more than anything else seems to be a significant deterrent for acceptance is rejection from within the family environment itself, not so much outside. And what a lot of the data seems to suggest is that one very predominant concern that comes up is, how will my sister, my brother get married? If I am an out person, it will ruin their life. So there is that. I mean, this is an illustrative example of things that you can say it is internalized homophobia. You can say it is a lack of an accepting family environment, but it has debilitating consequences for mental health. So now, what has changed though? Because if you look back from 2009 to now, and what has changed in the last 15-20 years, since the article that I shared with you, that talks about what the psychiatric literature in an Indian context before 2009 discusses, and what issues and what their preoccupations are, the medical literature, and what post 2009 the medical literature has been preoccupied with. So number one, for those, I mean, the number of people that still come out has stayed static over the last 15 years or so, which is barely about 20 to 25% of people that would have sex with men. But the average age of coming out is showing a downward trend, and more gay men are coming out earlier in their lives. What has also changed is that 15 years ago, there was hardly any significant internet presence. There was no significant resources where people could connect with other people. And the ease of finding community and the ease of intimate partners has changed over the last 20 years. There has been significantly more representation and visibility in media and increased awareness. And with time, changing attitudes in the healthcare and psychiatric professions. which was not the case earlier. And a lot of this primarily is because data on this is hard to get. So a lot of it is based on anecdotal observed things, but there has been a significant change in the psychiatric profession's attitude towards issues like this. So moving on now, to focus on, as I said earlier, issues in relating to this. One issue is that possibly for the first time, a significant population of older LGBT individuals who are not in cis heterosexual relationships is emerging. As an aging population emerges, unique and unanticipated needs are emerging. And this group is also significantly, historically has been less likely to seek mental health treatment, but also is continuing to face issues relating to mental health care. So attitudes towards older LGBT individuals have changed within the community significantly over the decades. A lot of this is anecdotal information that is available. But one thing that a number of people have called out is that in a older world, in a pre-2000s world, the way you met other LGBT people, especially we're talking about in a cis gay context, were in the absence of platforms such as social media and in the absence of dating websites and so on. You met other people from the community primarily through people that were established older people who ran sort of, community events and programs like that. What has changed over the last, and the LGBT community was a much more accepting sort of space historically. That was not an ageist space. What has changed significantly in the last 15, 20 years is that you have one generation that has come up, that has come of age in the last 10 years or so, which has a markedly different attitude towards the world than all the generations before it. So there's limited blending of age groups in a sense. So that feeds in further to the isolation, that feeds in further to the other issues that we have discussed so far. Now, in the interest of time, and also because I think twice so far my internet is cut off, and I'm afraid it's going to cut off again. I'll pause now.
Thank you, sir, for such an amazing session. Thank you for sharing your valuable experience with us. And, our conversations became more in-depth and interesting because of your insightful viewpoint and unwavering dedication to discovering uncharted territory. Thank you very much. I would request Professor Vibhuti Patel to provide her remarks. And yes, ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Adhiraj, for such a systematic, powerful presentation. You have touched upon all this thing, and I also see around me my generation of queer people, their loneliness, and even those who founded the organization, they have been ousted by the younger generation. So it's a very, very painful reality that one sees, and how to create a community for the old age support, health issues, and the nursing and all care. But I want to know that currently in the psychiatry, what is the predominant ideological framework that determines the attitude towards queer community, LGBT community? Number two, Mental Health Act 2017. How does it take into consideration the LGBT concerns? And the third one is that conversion therapy has been banned by certain states, but it is still practiced. What can be done to challenge that?
Sorry, there are 3 questions, so please interrupt if I forget any of them. We're talking about the Mental Health Care Act of 2017.
Yeah.
So that talks extensively about various things that were supposed to happen, district level mental health care resources and so on. In practice, a lot of that has stayed on paper. That has not been implemented. So it is a step in the right direction. I don't think specifically it addresses this issue, but nothing significant in terms of policy interventions have happened there. The other point that you raised was about conversion therapy within the psychiatric establishment and attitudes in general towards these. The overwhelming attitude that I have seen in the psychiatric establishment is that there is a sort of trade-off between what the science is and what they believe the practice should be. So overwhelmingly, you'll hear a lot of professionals say things like, there is nothing wrong with being homosexual. There's nothing wrong with any of this. But for your own wellness, would it be easier if you get married? Even now, people continue to say things like that. Ultimately, the purpose of everything is procreation. So that sort of disconnect between evidence and science and larger social prejudices continues to plague the establishment. And that, I think, will take some time to change.
Yeah. In terms of ideological influence on psychiatry as a discipline.
Sorry, say that
What has
conversion
been
therapy.
the most dominant ideological influence in the psychiatry as a profession? Is it Freud, neo-Freud?
I don't think Freudian psychiatry is psychology, perhaps to some extent, but overall there has been very little willingness to engage with a lot of these issues. I mean, ultimately it boils down to very conventional notions of gender identity, and a very limited understanding of this space.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Now the floor is open for questions from the audience. Keeping in mind the paucity of time, I would request Partha ji to,
Email ID.
yeah.
They want your email ID.
Yeah, firstly, I think someone has asked for your email ID, so if you're comfortable sharing.
Sure, I'll do that.
Yeah, and the chat box. I have shared some of the important documents in connection with Professor Adhiraj's presentation and also Dr. Pushpesh's presentation. You can see them on chat box. Participants, I have shared PDF files. Yeah.
I think Khushbu ji can ask a question, and please keep it short if possible. And also, so has shared his email. You can forward the questions there. Khushbu ji, Simran ji, anyone could unmute yourself, and let's get done with the questions as soon as possible. Well, I can read them out. Yeah,
sure,
hello.
Yeah, please go ahead with the question.
Good evening, sir, and thank you for the session. So I am a little nervous about asking this question because it may sound ignorant. So when we talk about transgender persons, this term gender dysphoria, of not, being able to align the gender identity with assigned sex at birth comes up. And I have seen that, people around me, they talk about gender dysphoria, that this is proof that they are not normal people, they are suffering from a psychological disorder. So I just wanted to ask, what is the legitimacy of this argument? And what would be an effective counter argument to persuade acceptability of trans persons?
So just to clarify, I think most of what I discussed did not specifically engage with developments that have happened in the space of transgender individuals. And there has definitely been a huge paradigm shift of sorts. Because like you said, I think now broadly the understanding is that gender dysphoria is something that exists, but this is something that must be acknowledged and should not be pathologized in the sense, but also that it is something that you help a transgender person to in the process of transitioning. So the dysphoria emerges essentially not because they're not normal or per se suffering from a psychological disorder in the way that you frame this question, but it is part of that aspect of transitioning, that aspect of aligning yourself with who you really are.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for the answer.
Yes, so sir, we have a few questions. If you could please answer them in the Q&A box. And we also have a question by Victor G in the webinar chat section. If you could answer it there, and we could move forward with the
Sure.
next.
Done. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, so thank you, sir, for your, we would like to express our genuine gratitude for your participation in our session. Thank you once again, and thank you for your time and your words. So, ma'am, moving forward, I would request Professor Veena Vaswani ji to start the session. Vaswani ji is Director, Center for Ethics and Professor, Department of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology, Yenepoya, deemed to be University, Mangalore. Professor would be taking the session on transformation required from Homo economicus to Homo ethicus. Over to you, ma'am.
Good evening.
Good evening, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Dr. Vaswani, we can hear you. We can't see you.
Okay, fine.
Now
Thank you.
we can.
Good evening to you.
Thank
Yeah. So I do wish. Just a minute. Yeah. Okay. This is fine. Okay. I do wish to acknowledge. There's a problem.
Yeah, ma'am, your mic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this okay?
If you can mute the speaker of the other device or in.
I did that.
It's echoing, ma'am.
Not the mic, but the speaker. Otherwise, the voice will keep on coming from there. या तो मैं उसका पूरा sound आप कम कर सकते.
Just a minute. Is this better?
Yes, now it's fine.
But it will echo. उससे भी आवाज आएगा ना, तो it will echo. Maybe ma'am, you can disconnect that device for now.
Actually, the problem is. Just give me a minute.
Okay.
Can you hear now?
Yes, but it is echoing. Voice is echoing.
I hope this is okay.
Fine. Yeah. Just
Can
we
you
can't-
hear?
Yeah, we can't see you.
Ma'am?
Yeah. We can hear.
She says no.
Can you hear, ma'am?
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you. Yeah.
I can't hear.
Okay, you put the speaker on then. No, Tom.
Is this okay?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Only
I
thing your
cannot
video
hear.
is not on.
I cannot hear what this.
Little louder.
Okay.
Video चाहिए?
They have asked me.
You have a video to play?
No, my video.
Yeah, videos.
Okay, ma'am. Shall I start now?
Yes.
Yeah, video also come. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay, fine. So
It's in working mode, make it
yeah,
slight.
I'll put in that. So I would like to start with this belief that something that we do not know, and we insist that we know and we are right. And by doing that, we are causing a huge division amongst people. We have caused and we will continue to do so based on our belief, which were wrong, based on the customs which are wrong, because we do not question them with open mind. So that kind of belief that we bring about is one of the reasons it is so difficult for intellectual masses to overcome the mad mobocracy. It is so easily a wrong WhatsApp message can influence thousands of people, whereas one lone person telling the right thing, his voice gets muffled. So, what is the nature of knowledge, and how do we acquire it? And how do we know this is the expanse of knowledge and nothing beyond that? Supposing we have a sack and we go on removing one after the other ball from the sack, every time we get a white ball, does that automatically mean that the sack has only white balls based on our experience? Or does that mean it's possibility which we don't know, but we cannot rule out? And do we make any amends for that? Because this is where the belief system comes in. And we have to, as we do this presentation, I would like you to introspect and look into yourself. Have we gone through the same experiment? Have we met a couple of transgender people and we typify everybody to be like that? We have had one or two wrong or bad experiences. We think the whole world is like that. And is that a reason enough for us to behave in a particular way with a particular community, people, religion, race, and tribe? Because according to many philosophers, knowledge needs to be experienced through sensory inputs. This form of knowledge, a posteriori knowledge, is there we experience. But does that mean you have got a comprehensive experience? Supposing I'm traveling in a train and because of jostling of the crowd, I get pushed. Can I say that train is horrible because you should never travel by train because everybody gets pushed? So how then our sensory inputs will give us enough information to say this is just one off thing and it may not be the other thing? But is this not how we make our radical ideas? A person says something and we forever say, oh, this is wrong. I don't want to trust him. A person has done some wrong or a mistake. We remember that forever compared to a positive action done by a person. Many philosophers like Nietzsche and Rorty have questioned this view and have maintained that what is believed to be knowledge can be perceived in multiple ways. It's a matter of perspective. It's not everything is black and white. I can go on removing the ball till I get one red ball. And then I can't say that this has got only white and red ball because I've never exhausted removing. So in that case, how do we put the boundary for the knowledge? And how do we say what I don't know doesn't exist? And if I say that, then immediately I'm discovering the further ball that they come out from there to be unaccountable or saying that that has no right to come. So knowledge garnered through research is frequently built on assumptions. And this research has failed humanity many a times. I'm also a researcher, but I have no hesitation in saying that we have not always made a sound decision. Research mistakes have cost people lives, dignity, livelihood, and whatnot. So these assumptions may or may not be true, but one may believe them to be so depending on your experience. But at the same time, you cannot prove that the contrary doesn't happen. So the word human is a noun referring to a person. It can be man, woman, child, or baby. We often use the word human to differentiate us from animals and aliens. This is the dictionary meaning. You also might see the term human being, which means the same thing or a person. So all these years, if we are talking this as a human, then when we look at humane, it's an adjective describing actions that are compassionate and kind instead of violent and cruel. Something violent and cruel could be described as inhumane or inhuman. But if the word human does not include transgender, then where have we gone wrong? Is it not our fault? Is it not our fault of understanding, interpreting, than saying that they don't exist or we don't count them? Why? Because you counted wrong in the first instance. And what about the humaneness? Where have we lost it? You look at ourselves today, we are so much advanced in science, in research, in artificial intelligence, but our own humble human dignity is faltering. We do not know who to respect as human beings. We don't believe that all human beings, male, female, transgender, lesbian, gay, homosexual, intersex, queer, IA+, everybody is same under Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They are human and they get the equal protection from the law. If we don't say that, then are we even humane? So these are two things we need to question, and how do we transform? This is a thought experiment. I often ask our students, thought experiments are very good if you are sincere with the thought experiment. If you come out with what exactly you would do under the circumstance, and the next question would be, why would you do that? We'll let you know what are your faulty assumptions, what are your intuitive beliefs, and what makes you you, and what are your values based on. So all single rooms are taken, you're gone for a conference. You have reserved it, but that's a very crowded time of the year. So you have only the 3 double rooms to be occupied, and 1 bed in each of the rooms, a person who's got a whole body tattoo and piercing, a person with HIV/AIDS, and a non-binary man. I generally ask students, who do you want to room with? And these are girls, I make no bones about it. If they're girls or boys, whatever, but then who do you want to room with? And much of the hesitation is, I will sleep on the sofa, I'll stay out. Or maybe I don't mind tattoo, but I mind HIV and non-binary. But why? This is where one falters. Why comes from an intuitive belief that I may not feel safe. But why would you not feel safe? Unless we ask ourselves these questions, which are based on faulty assumptions, then we are doing the stereotyping, no matter whether we have MA, MSc, PhD, or double PhD. Our own introspection, the barometer of morality, should be upright. And we should be ready to say, this behavior, this belief has come from my family, which believed, and that's how I inherited. But now I'm going to detach that belief. I'm going to be open-minded and have my own assumptions. I don't even want to make any presumption. I want to keep myself open. So what's the basis of your decision? Many people make an intuitive decision. You go in a bus, one of the studies we say, then there is a person who has come and then he's homosexual and he's sitting next to you. Would you mind? He doesn't declare his identity, but you know him to be homosexual. Or he's a transgender person. What would you do? Many of them say, we'll change. We don't feel safe. But that is only intuitive. You're intuitive because it's a learned behavior in your family. You've learned it from your neighbor. You've seen it somebody, some negative portrayal in the movies, and you believe that this is what happens, but you're unable to give a cogent, ethical argument why you want to change your seat. Then you have to ask yourself, this is my bias. It's very often, if you don't indulge into asking, where is your bias? Then as a person, you are really not developing yourself to the full potential. And maybe some people say past experience. Many people have a mental imagery. I think it is like that. But why? On what basis do you think? And propagating the myth that, okay, the transgenders are this, and Males are like that. Male body tattooed is like this. And also does one negative incident make it a rule? You know, during winters, you see swallows everywhere. This bird, very pretty birds. But if you see one swallow, does that change the season? Does that make from summer to winter? Or it is just one swallow that one can see? So one experience, one movie that we see, a bad experiences we feel others have had should not be the reason to close our minds to our transgender, homosexual, lesbian, fellow human beings and our brethren with whom we stand in solidarity. This is the mental imagery. Which image do you agree with? The first one, or this one, or this, when you think of transgender? Do you think of them as doctors? There are doctors. Dr. Aksai is one of them who's speaking. Do you think of them as lawyers? There are good lawyers. They're fighting tooth and nail for what is their right, which they would have got easily. There are NGOs, human rights activists, even running a home for orphans. Nammane Summane in Bangalore, 5 transgender people together running such a beautiful home for orphan children. But do we remember them? No. Why? Because we are fixed. Our mindset is we are fixed on only certain images, and we want to be seeing only those images, and we want to imagine only that. And that is doing a great disservice for those who are trying to even do better. So if we look at them, that they stand in the shady corners in the petrol pumps and asking for money or whatever, we need to ask them, who put them there? Who put them there in the first place? You think anybody is born with a wish to beg? You think anybody is born with a wish to be sexually exploited? Because we left them there. We were comfortable because we suffered from what is called the otherification. We are perfect cisgenders. They're not so perfect. Transgender. This is how we stigmatized them. We discriminated upon them. We shamed and blamed them for no fault of theirs. We disowned them. We did not provide a safety net in the name of humanity, being humane. And in the cycle of stigma and discrimination, they were going down, but we were comfortable, we in the comfort zone. Please remember, whenever there is an exploitation, the person who is exploiting never complains. It is for the one who doesn't have voice and who is exploited that we need to be standing for. And very often I feel, in the last half a century, we have been running so much against economic development that we have forgotten what is it a human development within me. The day the hospitals became service, and from service industry on to industry to multinationals, I have nothing against multinationals. The care literally got traded off for cost. And similarly, we imagine when they cannot have 2 square meals, what kind of a health care are you promising them? So the more you think of economy, the more you're widening the gap between the transgender persons and the development, because if you have not given them opportunities and making everything costlier, you're only depriving them. So we need to understand what is discrimination. And whenever it refers to any negative attribute, a negative behavior, attitude towards the bearer, one of my aunt, who's very beautiful, of course now she's above 75, she never got married because she had a leukoderma. And whenever she was having a marriage talk coming up, she always made it a point to tell them she has a leukoderma patch on her abdomen. She didn't have it in the hand. And everybody wanted to see, and they wanted to examine her whole body to see if she has got any patch anywhere. I mean, what sort of human beings are we? What kind of market commodification is marriage? And we try to think this marriage fixes everything. What does it fix? It can't even fix a relation with a husband and wife. You're pushing even transgender people, homosexual, gay, lesbians, everybody, marry and you'll be all right. How can it be? It can even logically not answer the question. If you're not compatible, you can't get married. So why do you think that marriage is a panacea? You get married and all your problems are solved. It's like saying, we get rid of you in the name of marriage. We don't care what happens to you after marriage. So this is a kind of negative attitude. It keeps a person different. It's a mark of disgrace associated with the particular circumstances, according to Oxford Dictionary. So Goffman, one of the scientists who has done a phenomenal work in stigma discrimination, he says it diminishes a person from a whole to a small discounted one. Become a part of the whole, but not the whole. So it doesn't, when I go to somebody and they treat me like that, I feel less than a human, less than one whole person. And so also when you talk of stigma, the term stigma refers to any attribute, trait, or disorder that makes an individual as being unacceptable, different from normal people. That means he has a mark. We put an invisible mark on them, thabba, and then we say they are not them. That's otherification. Us, we are good. They are the others. With whom he or she routinely interacts, they have a kind of sanction. Don't talk to them. Don't visit them. Don't eat from them. So it's singling out a person, community, and subject to discrimination. But we all do it. When it comes to owning up, we say, I don't do it. I didn't do it. His fault, her fault. That person asked me something and I was afraid, so I didn't give anything. So that kind of unjust, prejudicial treatment of different categories of people, especially on the grounds of race, age, sex, gives rise to discrimination. A person who is removed from others. Actually, it's a very small incident, but it just tells us some way we are very unthinking. And my daughter was in teenage. They were in a school, and it was a very good school, and all her friends were very close to each other. Then one day, one teacher singled out a girl and called out and said, your SC/ST scholarship has arrived. You go and collect from there. And the girl was heartbroken. She was crying. When she came back, these people tried to ask her what happened. And she wouldn't want to speak. But since then, she didn't want to be with anybody, thinking that, oh, I don't want to be with them. I never told them I'm SC/ST. So now they came to know I'm SC/ST. So they may not like to be with me, and so on. So how unthinking we can be at times. Similarly, otherification is so easy. At the drop of a hat, we can remove a person from the comfort zone and make them feel discriminated upon. So discrimination indignifies, it dehumanizes. How do we start? We start by giving a label, a name, a category, like a particular caste, saying untouchable or something. Following that, it becomes stereotyping. Everybody starts doing the same thing. Why should we label? There is a huge human potential to label everyone, except self. Self-labeling is always good, and labeling others is always bad. So linking between the labeled person with a social characteristic. These people, that means us and them. So what you started as just labeling, making fun, now it became stereotyping. It became a nature with everybody. They know that when they come, you close the door. Don't talk to them. Don't look at them. And that causes separation, placing the stereotyped person into a different category from rest of the people. They stay in colony, they stay in cluster, they don't stay with us. We don't give rent for them. In fact, in many of the thought experiment in one, I always tell them that your house has not been taken on rent for a long time post-COVID, and somebody comes in and this person is transgender, would you give the house on rent? You should say the first protective this. No, but why not? But the whys are not clear, but no is very clear. So that is why we need to ask ourselves, what are we making our decision on? What information do we have even to make a decision? Emotional reaction, an emotional dimension is added like anger, fear, disgust, guilt. Most commonly, everybody takes fear as an angle. Oh, I'm very afraid of them. I feel insecure. What for? They have the maximum violence. Violence against transgender is much more than violence against cisgender. They have every right to be afraid of, not us. But we tend to say, oh, I'm very afraid of them. So what we start labeling, stereotyping, separation, emotional reaction, and it results in discrimination. We don't want to do anything with them. Let them not be with us. You call them some other day, you talk to them in some other place, make everything separate for them, but don't mix them with us. Because we want to maintain our distinctness. We will be shocked to know that today, many of us still do not consider our fellow human beings to be like us. Can you hear? Can you hear me? Because the mic went slow somehow. So that is the reason, because we are causing this, and all over the world, you see, there is a surfacing of the lesser human values. It is selfishness has come to the fore. White supremacy, racial discrimination, the anger against Dalits, the division of class, caste, creed, we are all party to it. So when you think of a man, a human dignity, actually is a simple man, a materialistic man, importance on possessing more and more, increasing age, posing increasing need for money, more population, demand on social goods. Whenever there is a social goods demand, resource limitation, we start finding ways to discriminate, stigmatize, deprive somebody of something. So we justify by saying we are getting it. They're not getting for this reason. So ethics is all about doing the right from wrong, good from bad, and virtue from vice. So what about justice? After all this, how much are we making sure that they are getting justice? Because human dignity is an essential concept in society as well as in morality. A quality and honor that can be determined by how we respect a fellow human being. From the sense of dignity concept, human rights are also measured. There's a common belief that dignity of human being can be measured through commercial, economic status of society. But you should think again if you're looking at economy, because one time it is there, next time it is not. So are we going to deprive them of their dignity? Are we going to give more dignity to somebody who is a rich businessman, and the day he loses it, are we going to rip him of the dignity? Because that is not a right indicator. The only indicator is humanity, a human person. And it just does not matter sex, age, race, anything, because unless we respect the fellow human being as our own, then it's not going to work out, because the discrimination is going to keep it. So quality of humans is complex phenomenon. It cannot be confined to commercial or economic system. The freedom fighters, they may not have any money, but they're given their life. So they also need to be given. So if you go on looking at what a person has, offers, and given for something, then they all need dignity. They're capable of. We have a need to know how people are enabled to live in the society in a dignified manner. So dignity is being or having an innate right to respect. It is indivisible. The moment a person is born, it's the reciprocation of society to confer dignity on that person. He doesn't have to earn it. I don't have to show my smartness to be called to be dignified. It's an extension of concept of absolute value. An absolute value is, it has to be valued, like mother. Our mother is an absolute value. I cannot make a difference between my mother and, let us say, Vibhuti madam's mother, and say my mother is better than her mother, or her mother is best and mine was second. No, they are absolute values, incomparable, and so is human dignity. So the English word dignity comes from the Latin word dignitas, dignitare, which is worth. So ordinary usage, it denotes respect and status, worthy of honor. And this is across to everyone. And it does not make a difference between male and female. We have made it because we have not understood the fountain of human experience. It's often used to suggest that someone is not receiving a proper degree of respect, or even that they are failing to treat themselves with proper self-respect. So we are supposed to give them that respect to make them feel counted. We have a study post-COVID in the transgender population, and it's literally heart-wrenching to see when people throw swabs on them while giving vaccine. They stand from a far distance and try to poke them. By coming near, one person said, "They treat us as virus, madam. They're treating us like virus. We are like COVID." So this is how the pain and suffering they go through. So human dignity is linked to the free will, ability of humans to do and choose their own actions. Some philosophers consider right of one human dignity comes from the duty of others to provide the respect. If the transgender people, lesbian, gay, homosexuals are not getting respect, it's worthwhile asking us, are we really giving them respect? Do we mean it? Are we sincere about it? Or is it only a lip service? Is it empathy we have with them or only sympathy? So it enforces obligation on others to respect them. So the 20th century dignity comes from an issue for physicians and medical researchers. Especially, I also come from healthcare sector. I also come from forensic medicine. I'm also an ethicist. I'm a researcher. And when I look at it in all these domains, what have we done? Nothing. Nothing substantial. We're scratching the surface. So there are some people who say we did our best, but they're not able to come forward. But also it would mean that we haven't given them a zone of comfort. Because of the ostracization that has gone on for years. Suddenly, if I go with the olive branch, you think they will believe me? You think they'll come running to me? Now it's our waiting time. We have to have patience and see that it's not what we want to do for them, but what they want us to do is more important. The agenda setting has to come from them. So that we need to build a bridge. It has been invoked in a question of bioethics of human genetic engineering, human cloning, end of life, enhancement surgeries. It's almost for everything we are talking of human dignity. It goes hand in hand with human rights. There should be no shortchanging of human dignity when with a newborn, whichever way it is. Intersex or this, it doesn't matter. A newborn is a newborn. A human being is a human being, absolutely. When we are born, sex is assigned at birth by doctors, dai, midwife, anybody. So then we start differentiating there by either we give a peda or we give a jalebi. So this is male, this is female. There's a haste by doctors and the parents to assign sex through surgery, sex reassignment surgery soon after birth. Sometimes, if it is ambiguous, then there is no need to make a haste. Let the child grow up to the teens and let the child decide depending on the hormones that which way the child would be going, whether a boy or a girl, what are the feelings of the person. So this may be trouble sometime later because many times if they assign the sex at birth, at teenage, the child may not agree with that particular sex, don't feel a part of it. So instead, it would be better to wait till they are in teenagers. Tamil Nadu came out with that sex reassignment surgery at birth should not be there. It's a very progressive judgment. That persons may have to undergo surgery again by choice if you do while at birth. Hence, sex reassignment surgery at birth is being banned. So similarly, when we look at identity, we should look at philosophically that every person, including the Ardha Nari Nateshwara, there is a divinity in every humanity. So it's perceived as self during childhood and adolescence. Sex is based on social structure, femininity, masculinity that aligns with the sex assigned. It's not but 100%. While sex is assigned at birth, gender is the perception of one's own identity. I may be assigned male, but at my teenager, as I'm growing up, I may feel, no, I'm more like female. I'd like to wear female clothes. I'd like to dance. I'd like to jump around like a female. So it's different from that assigned at birth, then the person is called transgender. Actually, this is a Swedish actor. It beautifully represents that every person could have a combination of both these characters. So there is nothing shocking about it, but the acceptance of the variation in nature. Tristan Reese from Portland in Oregon, who was born female but started taking hormones nearly 10 years ago. He gave birth to a male child. So these are small children, but they definitely know that the sex assigned to them is not exactly, and the parents help them. They're helping them, supporting them, educating them. So there are those whose gender identity is different from gender assigned. The perception of their own sexual identity is gender. And if there's an incongruency between the sex that is assigned to them and their own perception, then they're transgender. In this case, it was barely 6-year-old boy who they discovered that, no, I'm not a girl. So the parents announced the birth of, in this case, they announced the birth of their children as transgender, and they put their children to schooling and support throughout. So sex sometimes is not announced till a child develops perception of its gender. But in India, we are so much gung-ho about male birth. We are so much gung-ho about a sex of the child, that immediately there is a celebration. And even if there is a gender which is to be assigned later, it is done at the birth, and then you assign mostly males, and then you're done with it. So, but as a result, less than 2% of the transgender children are supported by parents, because parents have very, very idea that I'm right. It has to be male or female. If there is something in between, I do not want it. And they're either repressing the child from showing their actual gender, or they would like to disown the child. So they run away and they're unsupported. It is during this time that there should be programs for people when they run, that they should have a shelter, education, a support alternatively. Because then what happens, they get support only from the transgender community. Now we cannot blame them because they don't have any other source of income. The only source of income they can think when they've run from school without any education is a sex work. So, or begging. So they do not complete the education. In fact, we are working with the community. We work every month. We have next meeting is also Saturday. But we are trying to understand who of them want to complete education, who of them want to speak only English, who of them want to learn dance, because they have their own wishes. They too have their own hobbies. But nobody has ever asked, what would you like to do? But rather the question is, you better go collect money, because that it becomes their immediate food, roti, kapda or makan. So who would you hold responsible for discrimination, for the plight of transgender people in India? Everyone, including myself. All sections of society look down upon them, and people think that being a gay or lesbian is a disease. And the conversion therapy, the whole hoax, I think became an industry later. Wherever you can call it as a therapy and make money, it becomes a commerce and a trade, and not ethical at that. And people think that, so the transgender people are considered diseased, so you want to convert them. And then why? Then what? Then you're going to call alcoholics as disease, you want to convert. You want to call the drug addicts as a disease, you want to convert. At what? Where are you going to do it with people? So even the crimes against transgender did not have the same punishment as crimes against cisgender. Just for instance, for rape, it's a 10 years imprisonment, right? But for transgender, it is 2 years. So that itself is not equal. So that if there's not in the constitution, then how can we expect that there is a equality before everything? In a landmark judgment, Supreme Court India declared transgender person the third gender. In fact, it's progressive in its own way, but it also has certain things that needs to work on. It affirmed the fundamental rights guaranteed in the Constitution of India, and it will be equally applicable and gave them the right of self-identification of their gender as male, female, or third gender. They don't have to write transgender male, transgender female. They could identify themselves as male or female. But since transgender people were treated as socially, economically backward, the court held that they should be given reservations, admissions to educational institutions and jobs. Now, court judgment is one thing. Who executes them? And do they believe in the same thing? We have at times taken them for a job. We have waited in lines. We have filled out forms. But then when it comes to housing contract, now 4 or 5 or even 10 people stay in one room. The housing contract is not in this particular person's name. Then the job doesn't come. No, this person doesn't have a permanent residence, doesn't have a housing contract. So the Aadhaar card shows some other place, so we cannot give a job. So these are the problems that we are facing when you're saying, okay, court judgments are this, but what happens? Who is getting a job? And how can we make sure that this should not come in the way? States of Tamil Nadu, Kerala were the first to introduce transgender welfare policy. They have some very good policies. And traditionally, now what happens now when you look at money, economics, when you look at ethics. Between the two, everybody chooses for money. But if you chose for ethics, in a long run, there would be more peace, harmony, and distributing what you have. Then you run after money, but there's so much of harmony amongst people and one-upmanship and loss of dignity for many. I say this because economics has focused primarily on efficiency and maximizing individual utility or profit, often neglecting broader social and environmental consequences. How many industries are spewing venom in the name of economy today? Be it leather industry, chemical fertilizer, they're spewing venom. But we are allowing it, right? Why? Because they bring money. At what cost? We are poisoning our environment. Earth is not ours, it's our next generation. We have borrowed it from them, but we have plundered it. So ethical economics is a framework that seeks to integrate ethical consideration into economic decision-making and policy formulations. It recognizes that economic choices and actions have profound social and environmental implications, and therefore ethics should be an integral part of economic analysis. It is not just return on investment. But what about the returns on the values we stand for? Which value have you augmented? Ethical economics recognizes the importance of fairness, justice, sustainability, human rights in the economic system. Ethical economics advocates for including diverse perspectives and considering long-term consequences when making economic choices. Ethical economics encourages economists, policymakers, and individuals to reflect on the moral implications of economic choices and work towards economic systems that prioritize ethical consideration alongside economic efficiency. So in the end, we have learned to be economists and bring in a lot of money, but we haven't learned to be good human beings. It is time we changed our mindset and tried to be good human beings. And in the way, we would also become good in economy, or the economy should center itself on the ethical principles. Now, I'm just putting this preamble to the Constitution where it says, we the people of India, when we specially talk into sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure justice to all its citizens, which is liberty of thought, that is social, economic, and political justice, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. I'm saying this with all my might, that when we look at things that are happening today, instead of invoking the gods, goddesses, we should invoke the constitutional rights, that equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and unity and integrity of the nation. So when we say this, actually, I'm more touched about this because when we had a upskilling workshop for transgender people, and then we had put this as a framed thing in the beginning of the workshop, and many of the times in the presentation, we start with this. And when we asked them, when they finished their tailoring and things, that what would you like to take home? We'd like to present you something. They wanted this constitution framed and given to them. So I said, this is one thing that we all must think, that if there is something we can invoke, we should invoke our constitution. It is time to say we have to move from being a homo economicus to homo ethicus. So thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. We extend our sincerest appreciation for gracing us with your esteemed presence during this session. And I would like to move ahead and call upon Professor Vibhuti Patel to provide her remarks. Thank you. Professor Patel, your mic.
This presentation will be our conscience keeper and constantly remind us of our translation and where are we going wrong and what we need to do to correct ourselves. It also gives us hope that change is possible if we give proper perspective and if we reach out to people. No? So that is very, very important. Another thing is that your experiences of pandemic, I think all of us have seen the pandemic during the pandemic, very, very painful experiences. But what have we, and that also made us do a lot of soul searching. Yeah. That we as a policymaker, even the public health system or the community or the relief organizations, the most prestigious relief organizations telling us that our kids are not meant
Absolutely,
for sex
absolutely.
workers and transgender people, and we have to really fight it out. And People's Health Assembly, Janaswasthya Parishad had to file public interest litigation in the Supreme Court so that they get ration kit and also the vaccination and other healthcare services. So I think at one level challenges are there, but change is also possible.
Yeah,
So I think that has come out from your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Patel. Now I would open the floor for questions from the audience. We passed our time limit, so let's keep it as short as possible. And yeah.
I've also left my email so they could even write to me. I'll respond, and they can put IMPRI as a subject line, so I will know where to place them. So yeah.
Thank you very much, ma'am. That would be very helpful for all the participants. I think we could, forward the questions there, and the participants could engage with, a conversation with you through your email, and you can move ahead. Yeah.
Good.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Veena Vaswani ji, for such an enriching session and for sharing your valuable experience with us. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would invite Professor Vibhuti Patel for today's session's closing remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
I think today's session, we went into deeper in terms of the more recent challenges for the transgender community and the queer this thing, because it started with the need for a data. Everyone is talking that without data, we are shooting in the dark. We need very robust data. And Dr. Mala Ramanathan's presentation about the understanding of the technical issues and from where we can start. Metadata is a long-term project because we know from our experiences of women's studies, it takes nearly 20 years of advocacy and robust research to change the thinking of census and NSS and NFHS. But I think the starting has happened because from identity now we are going into the real ground level material reality. The second presentation by Professor Pushpesh Kumar, which covered nearly 200 years of discourses with regards to transgender community, and right from how the left, those who were even thinking about society without any exploitation, they were also insensitive and exclusionary and did not take any stand when Oscar Wilde was incarcerated and he was imprisoned. He died a very painful death. None of the social democrats or communists or leftists or liberals, they took stand, and we call that as an era of enlightenment. No, and then this whole experience of American experience where both the communists and gay people, they were incarcerated. The communist society, how it criminalized the gays, and also three things were criminalized: abortion, same-sex relations, homosexuality, and also those gays and lesbians, all of them were criminalized at the same time in communist Russia. And currently also we see that in the post of the new left, which acknowledge, and the post-structuralist and post-cultural theories, they acknowledge this issue, but even amongst them, those who are only focusing on culture and performativity, they are missing out on material reality. And the new left is also talking about the material basis, the exploitation and the labor relations, which are extremely important. Elitism of culture, pride culture, or the drag queen culture, that is also being critiqued severely. And I think he brought in so many nuances of various contours of the peer studies. Then Dr. Adhiraj's Patsarthi's presentation on the mental health issue, I think very, very important, because he covered almost all aspects of and a very sharp and pointed presentation. And he also talked about the Mental Health Act or the conversion therapy, what are the limitations of this act. And finally, Dr. Veena Vaswani's thing, which was one very important issue that needed to be deconstructed, was ethical concerns. What are the standard of procedure from human to humane? how can we become? So I think today's day was it enhanced the understanding over last 2 days of this courses, and also expanded the horizons of sensitivity as well as sensibility so far as the queer issues and the challenges are concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. With your due permission, I would like to move ahead with the vote of thanks.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. As we come to the end of day 3 of Beyond Binaries, Understanding Sexual Identities and Queer Rights Issues in India, an online international summer school program, a 5-day immersive online certificate training course, I, Samriddhi, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, Gender Impact Studies Center, GISC, New Delhi. We are grateful to our experts for the day 3 session, Professor Mala Ramanathan ji, Professor Pushpesh Kumar ji, Mr. Adhiraj Parasarthi ji, and Professor Veena Vaswami ji, for taking out their valuable time and giving us and the participants an opportunity to learn from this online certificate program. We thank our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel, for convening the session. Recorded video of the session has been shared in your email, and the video of the session will also be shared with you for the learning. So will be the resources. We thank all our participants who have participated and raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberations. We look forward to welcoming you tomorrow, that is on the 22nd of June at 6 p.m. for our 4th day of this certification course by our panel of experts. We are grateful if you're watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join us in future for our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good day. Thank you.